Before you close your eyes tonight, imagine a land so vast that the horizon seems to stretch forever. A place where the sky occupies more space than the earth itself, where the wind travels unhindered across thousands of miles of open grassland, and where silence is not an absence of sound, but a living presence. Far away from crowded cities, beyond mountains, forests, and coastlines, there exists an ancient world known as the Eurasian steppe. It is a landscape of endless grasses rolling gently beneath enormous skies. During the day, sunlight pours across the plains without interruption. At night, countless stars appear above like scattered lanterns, illuminating a wilderness that has changed surprisingly little over thousands of years. And wandering quietly through this immense open world is one of the most unusual animals on Earth. At first glance, it almost seems imaginary. Its body resembles that of an antelope. Its movements are graceful and light, yet its face carries a feature unlike anything most people have ever seen. A large, soft, downward-facing nose gives the creature a curious appearance, as though it has stepped out of a forgotten chapter of natural history. This remarkable animal is known as the Saiga antelope. Tonight, we will follow its story, not in a hurry, not as a dramatic adventure, but as a slow and gentle journey across one of the oldest surviving landscapes on our planet. As the hours pass, we will travel through vast grasslands swept by seasonal winds. We will witness distant migration stretching beyond the horizon. We will encounter newborn calves taking their first uncertain steps. We will explore ancient ecosystems that once supported mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and countless other creatures of the Ice Age. And through it all, the Saiga will remain our quiet guide. The story of the Saiga begins long before human cities existed, long before roads crossed continents, long before maps gave names to nations. Its ancestors roamed enormous grasslands during a time when glaciers covered much of the northern hemisphere. While many of the great animals of that age vanished forever, the Saiga endured. Generation after generation, century after century, it continued its seasonal journeys across the open plains. Its survival is one of nature's most extraordinary stories. Yet tonight, there is no need to think about dates, numbers, or timelines. Instead, simply imagine the landscape. Picture a sea of grass moving gently beneath a cool evening breeze. Imagine distant clouds drifting across an immense sky. Listen to the faint rustle of dry vegetation swaying in rhythm with the wind. In the distance, a herd of saigas moves steadily across the steppe. Their hooves create a soft whisper against the earth. Their silhouettes appear small beneath the enormous sky. Nothing rushes them. Nothing disturbs the peaceful rhythm of their journey. For countless generations, their ancestors have walked these same routes. They have followed the changing seasons. They have crossed frozen plains during winter and wandered across flowering grasslands during spring. They have lived beneath storms, beneath sunlight, and beneath the same stars that continue to shine above us tonight. There is something deeply calming about such continuity. In a world that often changes rapidly, the Saiga reminds us of slower rhythms, the rhythm of seasons, the rhythm of migration, the rhythm of life moving patiently across vast distances. As we continue our journey together, you may begin to notice the pace of this story becoming slower, gentler, like footsteps fading into soft grass. There is nowhere to go, nothing to accomplish, no need to remain alert. The steppe itself encourages a different way of experiencing time. Hours seem longer here. Moments seem quieter. The wind carries away urgency, leaving only space, distance, and calm. Imagine standing upon a gentle rise overlooking the grasslands. The sun is beginning to sink toward the horizon. Golden light stretches across the plains. The grasses glow softly beneath the evening sky. Far away, a herd of saigas pauses briefly before continuing its slow movement westward. The air is cool, the landscape is peaceful, and for a moment, it feels as though the modern world has disappeared entirely. As daylight slowly fades, the colors of the steppe begin to change. The bright golds of the afternoon soften into gentle shades of amber and bronze. Long shadows stretch across the grasslands, reaching farther and farther as the sun drifts toward the edge of the world. A cool breeze moves through the open plains. It passes through countless blades of grass, creating waves that ripple across the landscape like the surface of a calm sea. The sound is almost impossible to describe, not loud enough to demand attention, not quiet enough to disappear completely. Just a constant, soothing whisper carried by the wind. The Saiga herd continues its journey. Some walk slowly, others pause to graze. Young animals remain close to their mothers, following carefully as they learn the pathways that generations have traveled before them. There is comfort in repetition, comfort in familiar routes, comfort in the simple rhythm of movement and rest. Perhaps that is why scenes like this feel so peaceful. Nothing here is rushed. The grass does not hurry as it bends beneath the wind. The clouds do not hurry as they cross the sky. The Saigas do not hurry as they make their way across the endless plain. Everything moves according to ancient patterns, patterns older than memory, patterns older than recorded history, patterns that have guided life across these grasslands for thousands upon thousands of years. As evening deepens, the air becomes cooler. The heat of the day slowly fades into the earth. Above, the sky begins its gradual transformation. First, the blue becomes softer, then deeper, then darker still. One by one, the earliest stars begin to appear. Tiny points of light emerge against the growing darkness. For countless generations, Saiga antelopes have lived beneath these same stars, night after night, season after season, year after year. Imagine what they would have seen. Imagine standing here centuries ago, the same winds, the same grasslands, the same constellations drifting overhead. Empires may have risen and fallen beyond the horizon. Cities may have been built and abandoned. Entire chapters of human history may have unfolded elsewhere. Yet here on the steppe, the rhythm of nature continued. The Saigas continued their migrations. The grasses continued to grow. The seasons continued their endless cycle. There is something reassuring about that thought, a reminder that some parts of the world still move according to ancient rhythms. As darkness settles across the plains, the herd begins to slow. Many animals pause to rest. Others remain alert, quietly observing their surroundings. The open landscape offers long views in every direction. There are no towering forests here, no crowded mountains, only distance, only space, only the vast horizon stretching endlessly beneath the stars. For a sleeping mind, such landscapes can feel especially comforting. There are no sharp edges, no sudden surprises, only gentle expanses fading into darkness. The steppe invites the imagination to wander, to drift, to move slowly from one thought to another without effort. Perhaps you can picture yourself walking across these grasslands, not as a visitor, not as an observer, but simply as another quiet presence beneath the night sky. Your footsteps are soft. The air is cool. The stars shine above with steady brilliance. Far in the distance, the silhouettes of Saigas move calmly across the horizon. They appear almost dreamlike, small shapes traveling through a landscape that seems larger than the world itself. The wind continues its endless journey. It brushes across the grasses, across the plains, across valleys and hills, across migration routes followed by generations long gone. The same wind that touches the herd tonight may have touched countless herds before them. It may have crossed these grasslands for centuries without interruption. There is no beginning to its journey, no obvious end. Only movement, steady and continuous. The Saigas understand this world in a way few creatures can. Their lives are intertwined with the steppe itself. They know where fresh grasses appear after seasonal rains. They know where winter winds become strongest. They know when it is time to move and when it is time to remain. These instincts have been shaped slowly over thousands of years, not through instruction, not through planning, but through experience carried from one generation to the next. A newborn calf enters a world already prepared for it. Ancient pathways await, ancient seasons await, ancient skies await. And somehow, despite all the changes that have occurred throughout history, those pathways still remain. As the night grows deeper, the stars become brighter. The Milky Way stretches faintly across the heavens. Its pale band of light arches above the grasslands. Below, the earth rests quietly. Above, the universe unfolds in silence. It is easy to understand why open landscapes often inspire reflection. The immense sky encourages thoughts to slow. The distance encourages perspective. The quiet encourages rest. Tonight there is no need to solve problems, no need to plan tomorrow, no need to revisit yesterday. The steppe asks for nothing. The Saiga asks for nothing. They simply exist, moving through the seasons, moving through the years, moving through a world shaped by wind, grass, and time. Soon, our journey will carry us deeper into their story. We will discover how these remarkable animals survived dramatic changes in climate. We will learn how they endured challenges that eliminated many other species. We will explore migrations that stretch across astonishing distances and witness the delicate beginnings of new life upon the grasslands. But for now, there is only the night, only the stars, only the endless plains resting beneath them. And somewhere beneath that immense sky, a quiet herd of Saiga antelopes continues its gentle journey across the ancient steppe, following pathways older than memory, moving calmly through the darkness, beneath constellations that have watched over their ancestors for thousands of years. The wind whispers through the grass. The horizon fades into shadow. The stars shine steadily above. And the peaceful story of the Saiga is only just beginning. Chapter 1. Meeting the Saiga. The night remains still over the endless Eurasian steppe. The wind continues its slow passage through the grasses, and the stars hold their quiet positions above an almost unimaginable expanse of land. In this silence, we begin to move closer now, leaving behind the wide horizon of imagination and approaching a more intimate presence within this world. We are meeting the Saiga antelope. At first, it appears almost delicate, as if shaped by the wind itself rather than by bone and muscle. Its body is light, built for endurance rather than strength alone, and its movements carry a softness that seems perfectly matched to the open land it inhabits. But what draws immediate attention is its face. The Saiga's nose, large and downward curving, gives it a look that is unlike any other animal alive today. It is not harsh or strange in a threatening way, but rather unusual in a quietly fascinating sense, as though nature experimented with form in a moment of creativity. This unusual structure serves a purpose. It filters dust carried by the steppe winds. It warms the cold air of winter before it reaches the lungs. It cools the heat of summer before each breath is drawn deeper inside. In this way, what seems unusual at first glance becomes something perfectly adapted to survival in a harsh and shifting environment. The Saiga does not struggle against its world, it belongs to it. As we observe more closely, the herd begins to reveal its subtle complexity. There is no chaos here, no loud movement, no sudden direction changes without reason. Instead, there is coordination that feels almost invisible, as if the group is guided by a shared understanding that requires no spoken instruction. The adults move with steady confidence. The young remain close, following the rhythm of those who came before them. Occasionally, an animal lifts its head, scanning the horizon, sensing the distant possibilities of movement across the open plains. The steppe offers no hiding places. Everything is exposed. Every movement is visible from far away. This has shaped the Saiga's behavior over thousands of years. Awareness becomes constant. Sensitivity becomes survival, and yet, despite this vigilance, there is still peace. The herd continues to feed gently as it moves. The grasses here are soft after recent seasonal growth, bending easily beneath careful mouths that select only what is needed. Nothing is taken in excess. Nothing is rushed. Even feeding becomes part of a larger rhythm, one that connects life to land in a continuous cycle of giving and receiving. If we pause for a moment and imagine ourselves standing among them, we might notice something surprising. There is no sense of aggression, no tension in the air, only presence. only quiet existence shared across individuals who understand instinctively that survival depends not on conflict, but on unity and awareness. The Saiga is not a solitary creature. It is a creature of movement and togetherness. Its strength is not measured in isolation, but in the continuity of the herd. As the night deepens further, the landscape around them begins to change once again. The temperature drops slightly. The grass becomes cooler to the touch. The wind carries a sharper edge, hinting at the transitions that define life in this region. Seasons here are not gentle suggestions. They are forces that shape every living thing, and the Saiga has learned, through generations, how to move with these forces rather than resist them. In spring, it follows the growth of fresh vegetation. In summer, it travels across vast distances in search of stable grazing grounds. In autumn, it prepares for the approaching cold. In winter, it endures the silence of frozen land and biting winds. This constant movement defines its existence, not as instability, but as balance. A balance between change and continuity. As we continue to observe, the herd begins to shift slowly across the land once more. There is no sudden signal, no dramatic moment of departure, just a gradual transition, as if the entire group is breathing in the same rhythm and slowly exhaling into motion. One step becomes many, one direction becomes shared, and the herd moves forward beneath the night sky. The stars above remain unchanged. They have witnessed countless migrations like this one, countless journeys across the same ancient terrain. From their distant perspective, the movements of life below appear as gentle patterns unfolding over time, patterns that repeat, yet are never exactly the same. There is something deeply calming in this repetition. It suggests that even in a world of constant change, there are still rhythms that persist, still cycles that continue without interruption, still moments of continuity that stretch beyond human perception. The Saiga does not think in terms of time the way we do. There is no awareness of centuries passing, no reflection on history, only instinct, only movement, only the immediate awareness of wind, grass, distance, and herd. And yet, in this simplicity, there is a kind of wisdom, a way of existing that requires no explanation, no justification, only participation in the natural flow of life. As the herd advances, faint shapes of the landscape begin to appear in the distance, gentle rises in the land, subtle variations in terrain, areas where grass grows slightly taller or thinner depending on the soil beneath. To the Saiga, these details are not abstract. They are known intimately. They are remembered through movement, through repetition, through inherited experience passed quietly from generation to generation. A path does not need to be drawn on a map to exist. It lives in memory. It lives in instinct. It lives in the quiet certainty of movement across familiar ground. Above them, the night continues to deepen. The sky becomes richer in contrast. Stars appear more numerous as darkness spreads across the horizon. The Milky Way arches overhead like a pale river of light, flowing silently across the universe. Below, the herd continues its slow passage through the grasslands. Each step is steady, each breath is calm, each moment unfolds without urgency, and as we remain with them in this quiet space, it becomes easier to let go of the feeling of distance between observer and observed. The Saiga is not far away in a dramatic sense. It is simply in another rhythm of existence, a slower rhythm, a more continuous rhythm, one that does not break easily, even under pressure or change. In this way, the steppe becomes more than a landscape. It becomes a state of being, a place where life is measured not by speed, but by endurance, not by intensity, but by continuity. And as this chapter comes gently toward its close, the herd fades slowly into the distance, becoming silhouettes against the soft glow of the horizon. Their movement remains steady, their direction remains certain, and their presence continues, quietly, as the night carries them forward into the vastness of the steppe. We will follow them further in the next part of their journey, as the story of the Saiga antelope continues to unfold beneath the same endless sky. #Chapter 2 an ancient survivor. The steppe grows quieter now, as if the night itself is learning how to breathe more slowly. The Saiga antelope continues its journey across the open plains, but our attention shifts gently, not away from the present moment, but deeper into the layers of time that rest beneath it. For what we are witnessing tonight is not only a living herd moving through grasslands. It is a fragment of ancient history still walking across the modern world. The Saiga is one of the last surviving witnesses of a distant age, a time when the earth was colder, harsher, and shaped by immense forces of ice and wind. Long before cities, long before agriculture, long before written language, there existed vast ecosystems that stretched across Eurasia like a continuous frozen sea of grass and tundra. This was the world of the Ice Age steppe. And the Saiga was already there, not as a newcomer, not as an experiment, but as a fully formed part of a larger living system that no longer exists in its original shape today. To imagine that world, we must slowly soften the boundaries of our present understanding. Picture landscapes where glaciers reached far into the distance, their surfaces glowing faintly beneath pale sunlight. Picture winds colder and sharper than anything most living beings experience today. And between these frozen regions stretched open grasslands, where life persisted with quiet resilience. It was here that the ancestors of the Saiga moved in great herds, following seasonal patterns shaped by survival itself. They were not alone. They shared this world with creatures that now exist only in memory. Mammoths moved slowly across frozen plains, their massive forms covered in thick hair, adapted to cold that seemed almost unlivable. Woolly rhinoceroses wandered through the same vast territories, their presence powerful and ancient. Predators of extraordinary strength and endurance followed these herds, maintaining the balance of an ecosystem that functioned with a different rhythm than the one we know today. And yet, amid all this grandeur, the Saiga remained a quiet constant. Small compared to the giants around it. Fast, alert, adaptable. A creature shaped not by dominance, but by endurance. While many species disappeared as the Ice Age came to an end, the Saiga endured. It did not survive by resisting change, it survived by moving with it. As climates warmed and glaciers retreated, the landscape transformed dramatically. Forests expanded into regions that were once open grassland. Deserts formed where moisture once flowed more freely. Entire ecosystems shifted, collapsed, and reformed into new configurations. For many species, these changes were too great to withstand, but the Saiga adapted. It followed the open spaces that remained. It moved across continents in search of continuity, and in doing so, it preserved a way of life that connects the present day to a much older Earth. When we look at a Saiga today, we are not simply looking at an animal shaped by modern environments. We are looking at a living inheritance of deep time. A biological memory carried forward through countless generations. There is something profoundly quiet about this idea. It does not demand attention. It does not announce itself loudly. It simply exists, like the steady rhythm of breathing in a sleeping world. As the herd continues across the steppe, it is worth imagining the invisible thread that connects each step to the distant past. Each movement is part of a pattern that has been repeated for thousands of years. Not exactly the same path, not exactly the same moment, but the same essential behavior. Move when the land changes. Rest when conditions allow. Follow the grass. Follow the seasons. Follow the subtle signals of a world that is always in motion. The Saiga does not carry maps. It does not record history. It does not reflect on survival in the way humans might. And yet its entire existence is shaped by the accumulated knowledge of survival itself. Knowledge encoded not in language, but in instinct. Not in memory as we understand it, but in biological continuity. As we continue to observe, the landscape begins to reveal its immense patience. The steppe does not rush toward any outcome. It does not seek to become something else. It simply continues. Grass grows, withers, and returns again. Winds shift direction without urgency. Seasons cycle through warmth and cold in patterns that have repeated for millennia. And within this system, the saiga plays its role with quiet precision. There is no separation between animal and environment here. Only participation, only interaction, only continuous exchange between life and land. The saiga feeds on the grasses that emerge after seasonal rains. In turn, its movement helps shape the distribution of plant life across the plains. Its presence influences predators, scavengers, and even the behavior of other herbivores sharing the same ecosystem. Everything is connected. Everything responds to everything else. And yet nothing appears chaotic. Instead, there is balance. A balance that is not fixed but constantly adjusting, like the slow tuning of an instrument that never stops playing. As night deepens further, we begin to understand why such landscapes inspire a sense of calm. There is no sudden interruption here, no artificial urgency, no fragmented attention, only long continuous space, only extended silence, only time unfolding without pressure. It is in environments like this that the mind begins to loosen its grip on tension. Thoughts slow down. Breathing becomes more even. The sense of distance between moments begins to soften. And just like the saiga moving steadily across the plains, awareness begins to follow a simpler rhythm, step by step, moment by moment, without force, without resistance. In the far distance, faint outlines of hills appear beneath the night sky. They rise gently from the flatness of the steppe, like quiet waves frozen in earth. The herd adjusts its path without hesitation. There is no need for discussion, no need for planning. The direction shifts as naturally as water flowing around stone. This fluidity is part of what has allowed the saiga to persist through so many eras of change. Flexibility becomes survival, movement becomes stability, adaptation becomes identity, and as we follow them further into this ancient landscape, it becomes increasingly clear that survival here is not about resisting time, it is about moving with it. The saiga does not stand apart from history. It moves through it, continuously, quietly, without interruption. Above, the stars remain unchanged. They are distant witnesses to everything below. They do not intervene. They do not alter the course of events. They simply shine, as they have always done, and beneath them, life continues its long and patient journey across the steppe. The herd moves onward. The grass bends beneath their passage. The wind carries their presence across open space, and the ancient rhythm of survival continues, unbroken, into the quiet depth of the night. In the next chapter, we will follow the saiga deeper into its daily existence, where survival is not only shaped by ancient history, but by the subtle demands of each passing moment on the vast and changing steppe. Chapter 3. The Endless Eurasian Steppe. The night over the steppe does not feel like a single moment in time. It feels like something far larger, something continuous, something that stretches backward and forward without clear beginning or end. As the Saiga antelope herd moves gently across the darkness, we begin to understand that their story cannot be separated from the land itself. To know the Saiga, we must first know the steppe, not as a map, not as a concept, but as a living, breathing expanse of earth and sky. The Eurasian steppe is one of the largest ecosystems on the planet. It is not defined by forests or mountains or oceans, but by openness itself, a vast horizontal world where the ground meets the sky without interruption. Here, the horizon is not a line that confines vision. It is a feeling that expands it. A sense of space so wide that the mind slowly begins to adjust to its scale. Grasslands dominate this environment, endless fields of resilient vegetation that bend with the wind and rise again after every season. There are no towering structures to break the view, no dense forests to enclose movement, only waves of grass moving in response to air currents that travel across continents. In the summer months, the steppe can appear almost soft. Green tones stretch across the land, broken occasionally by dry patches shaped by heat and distance. In winter, the same world transforms completely. Snow spreads across the plains, turning the landscape into a pale, silent surface where movement becomes more visible and sound travels differently. Yet through all these changes, the openness remains. This openness is not emptiness, it is a form of structure in itself, a structure defined by distance, exposure, and continuity. And within this structure, life has learned to adapt in remarkable ways. The saiga is one of those adaptations. Its existence is inseparable from the scale of the steppe. Its body, its behavior, and its survival strategies all reflect a deep relationship with open land. There is nowhere to hide here, no dense cover, no hidden refuge. Survival depends on awareness, on movement, on reading the subtle signals of wind, light, and sound across great distances. Even the wind itself feels different in this environment. It does not weave through trees or bounce off mountains. It travels freely, sometimes gently, sometimes with intensity, always shaping the grasses as it passes. It carries with it the scent of distant places, the memory of faraway storms, the temperature of regions beyond the horizon. For the saiga, this wind is both challenge and guide. It informs movement, it signals change, it connects distant parts of the ecosystem into a single flowing system. As we continue to observe the herd, we notice how deeply they respond to this environment. Their movements are not random, they are not purely instinctive in a mechanical sense. They are responsive, adaptive, continuously adjusting to subtle variations in conditions that we might overlook. A shift in wind direction, a change in grass density, a distant sound carried across open space. Each detail becomes part of a larger understanding of where to move and when to pause. The steppe rewards those who listen carefully, not with words, but with survival. As dawn begins to approach somewhere far beyond the horizon, the first faint changes in light begin to appear. The darkness does not disappear suddenly. It softens gradually, as though the sky itself is remembering color. Deep blues begin to lighten. Stars fade slowly rather than vanishing all at once, and the outlines of the land become more defined. Rolling contours of grassland emerge from shadow. Distant shapes that were invisible during the deepest part of night now begin to take form. The saiga herd continues its journey through this transition. There is no pause between night and day in their movement, no ceremony marking the change. Only continuity. The same steady rhythm that has guided them through darkness now carries them into the first light of morning. In this environment, time does not feel segmented. It feels fluid. One state dissolves into another without clear boundaries. Night becomes dawn, dawn becomes day, day becomes evening, evening becomes night again, and the cycle continues. For the saiga, this cycle is not abstract. It is lived experience. It determines when to feed, when to rest, when to move, when to remain alert. Every part of existence is shaped by these transitions. As the light grows stronger, the grasslands reveal more detail. Small variations in terrain become visible, subtle dips and rises in the earth, areas where moisture collects, regions where vegetation grows thicker. These details form an invisible map known intimately by the herd, a map not drawn on paper but written into movement. Across generations, this knowledge has been refined, not through conscious learning, but through survival itself. Each generation inherits the patterns of those before it. Each journey reinforces paths that have been traveled countless times. Yet nothing here is fixed permanently. The steppe is always changing. Rains reshape the land, droughts alter vegetation, seasons redefine accessibility, and so the saiga must remain flexible within tradition, anchored in memory, responsive to change. As the herd advances, we begin to appreciate the scale of their movement more deeply. What appears as a simple walk across grassland is in fact part of a much larger migratory rhythm, one that spans vast distances, one that connects different regions of the steppe into a unified ecological system. These migrations are not journeys in the human sense. They are cycles, returns, repetitions that ensure survival across shifting conditions. The saiga does not migrate toward a destination. It migrates toward balance, toward resources, toward stability that is always temporary but always renewed. There is something profoundly steady in this pattern, a kind of resilience that does not depend on permanence, but on adaptability. As morning light continues to grow, the herd becomes more visible against the landscape. Their forms are no longer silhouettes, but living shapes moving through illuminated grass. Yet even in daylight, there is no sense of exposure that disrupts their calm presence. The openness that defines the steppe also defines them. They are not separate from it. They are part of it. The grass, the wind, the sky, and the herd all participate in the same continuous system, a system without center, without boundary, without interruption. And as we remain with them in this expanding light, we begin to sense how deeply the steppe shapes not only the body of the saiga, but also its way of being. To exist here is to accept constant movement, constant awareness, constant adjustment to a world that never remains still. Yet within this constant change, there is stability of another kind. The stability of rhythm, the stability of return, the stability of life continuing across generations under the same open sky. As the herd moves farther into the growing day, the horizon remains endlessly distant. No matter how far they travel, the world does not close in. It expands, and somewhere within that expansion, the quiet story of the saiga continues, carried forward by wind, grass, and time itself. In the next chapter, we will move closer to the intimate details of their daily existence, where survival is shaped not only by vast landscapes, but by the smallest decisions made in each passing moment on the endless steppe. Chapter 4, The Remarkable Nose. As daylight settles fully over the steppe, the world of the Saiga antelope becomes clearer in its details. The wind is still present, as it always is, but now it carries light instead of darkness, revealing textures in the grasslands that were hidden during the night. The herd continues its quiet movement, and as we observe them more closely, one feature becomes impossible to ignore. The nose. At first glance, it appears unusual, almost exaggerated in shape, hanging gently over the saiga's mouth like a soft, flexible structure that seems out of place compared to the refined lines of other antelopes. But in nature, nothing is out of place without reason. Every curve, every angle, every adaptation carries a story shaped by environment and necessity. The saiga's nose is one of the most remarkable examples of this principle. It is not a decorative trait. It is a survival instrument. A living filter, a regulator of breath, a quiet mechanism that allows this animal to exist in one of the most demanding climates on Earth. The steppe does not offer gentle conditions. In summer, the air can become dry and filled with fine dust carried across vast distances. In winter, the air turns cold enough to challenge even the most resilient forms of life. Through all of this, the saiga must breathe continuously while moving long distances across open terrain. Its nose helps make this possible. Inside this soft structure lies a complex network of passages that warm incoming air during cold seasons, preventing the lungs from being shocked by extreme temperatures. In warmer months, the same structure helps cool and filter the air, reducing the amount of dust and particles that enter the respiratory system. It is a single adaptation that serves multiple purposes across shifting environments. A design shaped not by intention, but by countless generations of gradual refinement. As we watch the herd move forward, it becomes easier to appreciate how seamlessly this feature integrates into their daily existence. There is no visible effort, no awareness of complexity, only function expressed through natural movement. The saiga breathes, and in that breathing it interacts with its environment in a way that is both subtle and essential. The steppe itself plays a role in shaping this adaptation. Because the land is open, wind carries fine particles freely across long distances. Because vegetation is low and sparse, there is little natural barrier to airborne dust. Because seasons fluctuate so dramatically, the air itself becomes an unpredictable force. The saiga's nose is a response to all of these conditions combined. A biological negotiation between body and environment. As we continue observing, Another aspect becomes visible. The saiga does not move as though it is burdened by this adaptation. There is no sign of discomfort, no interruption in behavior. The nose does not hinder movement or feeding. Instead, it becomes part of a unified system that supports survival without drawing attention to itself. This is one of the quiet truths of evolution. The most important adaptations are often the least noticeable in daily life. They do not demand awareness. They simply function. As the herd spreads slightly across the grassland, individuals occasionally lift their heads, scanning the horizon. In these moments, the nose shifts subtly with their movement, responding to changes in airflow and position. It is flexible, sensitive, capable of adjusting in real time to the needs of the body. In a world where survival depends on constant awareness, even breathing becomes a form of interaction with the environment. And the saiga has refined this interaction over thousands of years. As we step back and consider the broader picture, it becomes clear that this adaptation is not isolated. It is part of a larger system of survival traits. The saiga's body is light and built for speed. Its legs are long and efficient, allowing it to cover vast distances without unnecessary energy expenditure. Its eyes are positioned to maximize awareness of approaching movement across open terrain. Its herd behavior reduces individual risk by distributing attention across many individuals. And its nose completes the system by ensuring that every breath supports endurance rather than limiting it. Everything works together. Everything reinforces everything else. There is no single dominant feature, only harmony between parts. As the sun rises higher, the air begins to warm. Light spreads evenly across the grasslands, revealing subtle variations in color and texture. The herd continues to move, now slightly more dispersed than during the night, but still connected through constant awareness of one another. Occasionally, a young saiga pauses briefly, testing the grass before continuing forward. Nearby adults maintain gentle proximity, ensuring safety without restricting movement. There is a balance here between independence and unity, between individual action and collective stability. The saiga lives within this balance effortlessly. It does not reflect on it. It does not question it. It simply exists within it. And yet, when we observe carefully, we begin to see how refined this balance truly is. Each movement serves a purpose. Each pause carries meaning. Each breath contributes to a continuous exchange between body and world. Even the act of feeding becomes part of this system. The saiga selects grasses with precision, avoiding unnecessary energy expenditure. It moves forward in a way that ensures the herd does not overgraze a single area. This creates a natural rhythm of renewal across the steppe, a pattern where life and land remain in constant dialogue. As we return our attention to the nose once more, it becomes clear that it is not merely an adaptation for climate control. It is also a sensory tool, a way of perceiving the world through subtle shifts in air, changes in humidity, variations in scent carried across distance, information that helps guide movement long before visual confirmation is possible. In the open steppe, where visibility stretches far but details can still be distant, this sensitivity becomes invaluable. It allows the saiga to respond to its environment with precision, not through analysis, but through immediate physical awareness. As afternoon approaches, shadows begin to lengthen slightly once again, marking the slow progression of the day. The herd continues its steady rhythm, unaffected by the passage of hours. Time for the saiga is not measured in abstract units. It is experienced through changes in light, temperature, and movement. And within this continuous flow, the nose remains a constant presence, breathing, filtering, sensing, supporting life in a world defined by exposure and distance. As we begin to close this chapter of observation, it becomes clear that what first appeared unusual is in fact a masterpiece of adaptation, a reminder that nature does not design for appearance, it designs for survival. And in the quiet expanse of the Eurasian steppe, the Saiga antelope carries this truth forward with every step it takes. The herd moves onward into the widening landscape, guided by wind, memory, and breath, continuing its ancient journey beneath an open sky that has witnessed countless generations of this remarkable species. In the next chapter, we will explore the daily rhythm of the saiga in greater depth, following its movement through feeding, rest, and migration as it continues across the endless grasslands. Chapter 5: A Day in the Life. As the afternoon light settles gently over the Eurasian steppe, the world of the Saiga antelope continues its quiet rhythm, unchanged by observation, unaffected by attention, and guided entirely by ancient patterns that repeat themselves across generations. There is a particular kind of calm that exists in this part of the world. It is not silence in the absolute sense. It is a living quietness, a space where wind, grass, breath, and movement form a continuous background presence that never fully disappears. The saiga herd moves slowly now, not with urgency, but with purpose shaped by instinct and environment. Each individual is part of a larger flow, a shared direction that does not require communication in the way humans understand it. There are no commands, no leaders in the strict sense, only alignment, only response, only the subtle awareness of where others are moving and how the landscape is changing. A day in the life of the saiga is not divided into structured segments the way human life often is. There are no clocks marking hours, no schedules defining tasks. Instead, time is experienced as variation, light and shadow, heat and coolness, movement and rest. Feeding becomes the central rhythm of the day. The saiga lowers its head to the grasslands, selecting carefully from the vegetation available. Each bite is part of a larger ecological interaction that has repeated for thousands of years. The grasses here are resilient, adapted to grazing and regrowth. They bend but do not break the cycle of life. In return, the saiga moves on, never remaining too long in a single place. This movement is essential. It prevents overuse of the land. It allows regeneration. It ensures that both animal and environment continue in balance. As the herd feeds, there is a softness to their behavior that contrasts with the vastness of the landscape. The steppe may appear empty at first glance, but within it exists a dense network of relationships. Plants responding to grazing pressure, insects moving through soil and air, small mammals navigating underground pathways, birds observing from above, and predators, always distant but present, shaping awareness even when unseen. The saiga exists within this network as both participant and responder. Its survival depends on constant awareness, yet that awareness is not stressful in a human sense. It is natural, integrated, continuous. Occasionally, a saiga lifts its head from feeding. The motion is subtle but meaningful, eyes scanning the horizon, ears adjusting to faint sounds carried by wind, nose sensing changes in air currents. In these brief moments, the animal becomes fully present to its surroundings. Then, just as quickly, it returns to feeding. This cycle repeats throughout the day, not as repetition in a mechanical sense, but as rhythm. A rhythm that sustains life without requiring conscious thought. As the sun continues its slow arc across the sky, the temperature of the steppe begins to shift. Heat builds gradually but never overwhelmingly. The grasses shimmer slightly under the light, creating patterns that seem almost fluid when seen from a distance. The herd adjusts its position subtly, moving toward areas where grazing conditions are more favorable. This movement is not sudden. It is distributed across the group, each individual responding to the same environmental cues in slightly different ways, yet maintaining overall cohesion. There is something deeply stable in this kind of coordination, a system that does not rely on instruction but on shared perception. As midday passes into late afternoon, the saiga begin to slow their pace further. Some individuals pause longer between movements. Others rest briefly while standing, conserving energy while remaining alert. Rest here is not separation from the environment. It is integration with it. Even in stillness, the animal remains aware. The steppe does not allow complete disengagement. Every moment carries potential change, a shift in wind direction, a distant movement on the horizon, a subtle change in group positioning. Awareness is continuous but not exhausting. It is simply part of existence. In the distance, the landscape begins to reveal its subtle layers. Gentle slopes rise and fall across the terrain. Patches of grass vary in density and color depending on soil and moisture. These variations are not obstacles. They are guides. They shape movement without forcing it. The Saiga reads this landscape as naturally as breathing, not through analysis, but through familiarity built across generations. As evening approaches slowly, the quality of light begins to change once more. The sharp brightness of midday softens into warmer tones. Shadows stretch longer across the grasslands, creating depth where earlier there was uniform illumination. The herd begins to shift again, preparing for continued movement as part of its larger migratory pattern. This preparation is not a distinct event. It is a gradual transition, a change in pace rather than direction. Movement resumes in waves across the group. One cluster begins, another follows, and soon the entire herd is once again in motion, flowing across the steppe like a living extension of the land itself. There is no separation between animal and environment in this moment. Only continuity, only shared rhythm, only movement shaped by wind, grass, and inherited knowledge. As the sun lowers further, the emotional tone of the landscape changes subtly. The heat of the day fades, the air becomes cooler, the wind feels softer, more consistent, as if the world itself is settling into a slower state of being. The Saiga responds to this shift without hesitation. It has experienced this cycle countless times, not as memory in a conscious sense, but as embodied understanding. The knowledge of what comes next is already present in its behavior. As night begins to approach again on the far horizon, the herd continues its steady progress. The silhouettes of Saigas become more defined against the fading light. Their movement remains calm, uninterrupted, and purposeful. There is no urgency in their pace, only continuation, only the steady unfolding of a day that mirrors countless days before it. And as we remain with them, observing this quiet progression, it becomes increasingly clear that the life of the Saiga is not defined by dramatic moments or sudden changes. It is defined by consistency, by rhythm, by the repeated balance between movement and stillness, between awareness and rest, between individual needs and collective survival. In this balance lies the essence of life on the steppe, a life shaped not by control, but by adaptation, not by dominance, but by continuity. And as this chapter gently comes to a close, the herd moves onward into the widening landscape, carrying with it the quiet certainty of patterns that have endured across ages, beneath skies that remain endlessly open and unchanged. In the next chapter, we will follow the Saiga into the heart of its seasonal migrations, where distance becomes a form of survival and movement itself becomes the language of life across the vast Eurasian steppe. Chapter 6. What Saigas Eat. The steppe is never truly still, even when it appears motionless from a distance. Beneath the wide sky and the slow movement of clouds, life continues in subtle layers that unfold quietly across the land. The Saiga antelope herd moves forward with the same gentle consistency that has carried it through night and day, across open grasslands shaped by wind and time. Now, our attention shifts from movement itself to one of the most fundamental aspects of existence: feeding, not as an act of urgency, but as a calm, continuous dialogue between animal and landscape. The Saiga does not eat in isolation from its environment. It participates in it. Every bite is part of a cycle that connects soil, plant, weather, and herd into a single living system. The vegetation of the Eurasian steppe is simple in appearance, but highly adapted to extreme conditions. Grasses dominate the landscape, along with herbs and low-growing plants that survive long winters, dry summers, and constant grazing pressure. To an untrained eye, this vegetation may seem uniform, but to the Saiga, it is a detailed map of nourishment, moisture, and seasonal change. Each plant carries subtle differences. Some are more nutritious during certain seasons. Some are easier to digest, Some grow in regions that retain moisture longer after rainfall. The saiga learns this landscape not through instruction, but through experience repeated across generations. As the herd moves slowly forward, individuals lower their heads and begin to feed. There is no rush, no competition, no visible struggle for access. Instead, feeding is distributed evenly across the group, shaped by proximity and availability rather than hierarchy. The grasses bend gently under their touch. They are not torn violently from the earth, but selected carefully. A small portion taken, enough to sustain, never enough to destroy. This is one of the quiet balances of the steppe, a system where consumption and renewal remain in constant negotiation. The saiga plays a key role in this balance. By moving continuously across the landscape, it prevents overgrazing in any single location. It allows plant communities to recover. It distributes pressure across vast distances. In this way, feeding becomes more than survival. It becomes ecological maintenance, a function that supports both animal and environment simultaneously. As the herd continues to feed, occasional moments of stillness emerge. A saiga lifts its head, pauses, observes the horizon, then returns to grazing. These brief interruptions are not signs of distraction. They are part of awareness. On open plains, vigilance is never fully absent. Even during feeding, the environment must be continuously read. Wind direction, distant movement, subtle shifts in herd position. Everything contributes to a constant state of gentle awareness. The steppe does not allow complete relaxation, but it also does not demand tension. Instead, it encourages a balanced state between attention and calm. As we observe more closely, we begin to notice how feeding patterns change with the seasons. In spring, fresh grasses emerge quickly after melting snow, offering soft and nutrient-rich growth. During this time, the saiga feeds more actively, taking advantage of abundance. In summer, vegetation becomes drier, and the herd adjusts by moving toward areas where moisture remains in the soil. In autumn, plants begin to lose energy, and feeding becomes more selective. In winter, when snow covers much of the ground, saigas rely on digging through thin layers of snow or following wind-swept areas where grass remains exposed. Each season reshapes the availability of food. Each shift in climate alters the rhythm of feeding. And yet the saiga continues, adapting without hesitation. This adaptability is not learned in a single lifetime. It is accumulated slowly through generations, embedded in instinct and behavior. As the herd moves across the grasslands, their feeding also influences the structure of the vegetation itself. Certain plants become more dominant in areas frequently visited. Others grow more abundantly where grazing pressure is lighter. This dynamic interaction creates a mosaic-like ecosystem, constantly evolving but never collapsing. It is not controlled. It is balanced through interaction. The saiga is both participant and regulator within this system. As the afternoon light softens, the herd begins to shift slightly in response to changing conditions. Feeding continues, but movement becomes more frequent between patches of grass. Small groups drift a few steps forward, then pause again. This slow progression ensures that no single area is exhausted. It also allows the herd to remain loosely connected while still maintaining cohesion. There is a quiet intelligence in this behavior, not conscious planning, but embodied understanding of how to exist within limitation. The steppe does not offer infinite resources in any single location. It offers abundance across distance, and so the saiga moves with that structure, taking what is needed, leaving what must remain, continuing forward. As we reflect on this, it becomes clear that feeding is not separate from migration. It is part of it. Each step across the landscape is influenced by the search for nourishment. Each movement is shaped by subtle ecological signals, rainfall patterns, plant regrowth, soil moisture, wind exposure. The herd reads these signals collectively, responding in ways that maintain long-term stability. Even the act of chewing carries a calm rhythm, slow, steady, unhurried. There is no urgency in consumption, only continuity, only the maintenance of life through repeated, simple actions. As the sun lowers slightly in the sky, shadows begin to stretch across the grasslands once again. The herd gradually transitions from intensive feeding to a more balanced state of movement and rest. Some individuals continue grazing, others begin to walk slowly, scanning the horizon. The group remains cohesive but fluid, always adjusting, always responsive. The landscape around them remains open and vast. No fences, no boundaries, only distance, only space through which life moves according to seasonal need. It is this openness that defines the Saiga's existence, and it is this openness that shapes every aspect of its feeding behavior. Nothing is fixed, everything is temporary, yet everything follows a rhythm that feels ancient and reliable. As we approach the end of this chapter, the herd continues its gentle progression across the steppe, leaving behind areas of grazed grass that will soon recover with time and rain. Behind them, the land is not diminished, it is simply in transition. Ahead of them, new patches of vegetation await, and so the cycle continues: feeding, movement, rest, return. In the next chapter, we will follow the Saiga as it enters one of the most important aspects of its existence on the steppe: migration across vast distances, where survival depends not only on what is found in one place, but on the ability to move endlessly across many. Chapter 7, Masters of Migration. The steppe changes again as the herd continues its journey, as if the land itself is breathing slowly between seasons. What once felt like a stable stretch of grassland now begins to reveal subtle shifts in texture and tone. The wind carries a different temperature, the light falls at a slightly altered angle. Even the grass seems to respond, bending in new directions as though it remembers that movement is inevitable here. The Saiga antelope does not remain in one place for long. Its existence is defined by motion, not chaotic motion, but structured, seasonal migration that stretches across vast distances of the Eurasian steppe. To understand the Saiga is to understand that stillness is not survival here. Movement is, but not movement for its own sake. Movement as response. Movement as adaptation. Movement as the quiet negotiation between life and a land that never offers stability in a single location for long. The steppe does not provide everything in one place. It distributes resources across space and time. Rain falls in one region while another remains dry. Grass grows abundantly in one season and retreats in another. Snow covers the land in winter, shifting availability once again. The Saiga follows these changes with remarkable consistency. It does not resist them, it aligns with them. As the herd moves forward, their formation subtly adjusts. At times they spread out widely, covering more ground to locate suitable grazing areas. At other times they tighten into a more compact group, conserving energy and maintaining cohesion as conditions demand. There is no fixed pattern, only response to environment. And yet, within this flexibility, there is structure. A shared direction emerges naturally, without visible coordination. Each individual senses the movement of others. Each step becomes part of a larger collective flow. Migration, in the Saiga's world, is not a journey with a destination in the human sense. It is a cycle, a return, a repetition shaped by seasons that have repeated for thousands of years. Spring brings renewal. Snowmelt opens pathways across the plains. Fresh vegetation appears in regions that were previously frozen or dry. The herd follows this emergence of life, moving toward areas of abundance. In summer, heat spreads across the steppe, and the Saiga adjusts its range, seeking cooler zones and stable grazing grounds. Autumn brings gradual decline in vegetation quality, prompting further movement as resources shift. Winter arrives with its quiet dominance, forcing the herd into survival mode, where every step is shaped by scarcity and endurance. Through all of this, migration remains constant, not as a single long journey, but as a series of connected movements across seasons. As we observe the herd more closely, it becomes clear that migration is not simply physical travel. It is ecological intelligence expressed through motion. The Saiga reads the landscape in real time. Wind patterns, soil moisture, plant growth cycles, temperature gradients, Even distant weather systems influence movement decisions. Nothing is isolated. Everything is connected across space. A storm in one region can affect grazing conditions hundreds of kilometers away. A dry season in another can redirect entire herds toward different corridors of land. This sensitivity to large-scale environmental change is one of the Saiga's most remarkable traits. It does not need maps. It does not need planning in the human sense. Its navigation is embedded in behavior shaped by countless generations of survival. As the herd advances, the ground beneath them begins to subtly change in composition. The grasses here are slightly shorter. The soil is firmer. The wind carries a different scent, faint but noticeable to animals attuned to such detail. These small variations signal transition, not abrupt change, but gradual movement into a different ecological zone. The Saiga responds without hesitation. The herd adjusts its trajectory slightly, maintaining cohesion while shifting direction in response to environmental cues. There is a kind of intelligence here that does not rely on thought, but on integration with surroundings. The boundary between organism and environment becomes less distinct the longer we observe. The Saiga is not separate from the steppe. It is part of its circulation, a moving component within a vast system of life and land interacting continuously. As afternoon light softens across the grasslands, the sense of distance becomes more pronounced. The horizon stretches endlessly in all directions. There are no obstacles to compress perception, only openness, only scale, only the quiet realization that movement here is measured not in meters or kilometers, but in vast stretches of time and space. The herd continues forward with steady rhythm, occasionally pausing, occasionally accelerating slightly as a group, but always maintaining forward motion. Even rest here is part of migration. Short pauses that allow energy to be restored before the next segment of movement begins. As we follow them, we begin to understand that migration is not exhausting in the way it might appear from the outside. It is structured endurance, a rhythm that balances effort and recovery, movement and stillness, awareness and rest. This balance is what allows the Saiga to persist across such a challenging environment. Predators exist along the migration routes. Weather conditions shift unpredictably. Distances are vast and unforgiving. Yet the herd continues, not because it overcomes these challenges in a dramatic sense, but because it integrates them into its way of life. As evening begins to approach again in the distance, the light across the steppe softens. The grasses take on warmer tones. Shadows begin to extend outward, shaping the land into longer forms. The herd does not stop. It simply adjusts pace, continuing forward into the changing light. There is something deeply rhythmic about this movement, something that mirrors the larger cycles of nature itself. Day into night, season into season, year into year, generation into generation, the Saiga does not experience migration as a single event. It experiences it as continuity, as life unfolding in motion. And as we remain with them through this quiet passage of time, it becomes clear that migration is not merely a strategy for survival. It is the expression of survival itself, a way of existing that transforms movement into stability, change into structure, distance into home. The herd continues across the widening steppe, becoming silhouettes once again against the slowly fading light. Their forms merge gently with the landscape, not disappearing but becoming part of its rhythm. And as the wind moves across the grasslands once more, carrying the memory of their passage, we are reminded that on this endless Eurasian steppe, nothing truly stands still. Everything moves, everything returns, everything continues. In the next chapter, we will enter the social world of the Saiga herd, where life is shaped not only by migration and environment, but by the quiet relationships that bind individuals together into a living, moving whole. Chapter 8, Life in the Herd. The steppe settles once again into its vast evening rhythm, as if the land itself is exhaling after a long day of quiet movement. The Saiga antelope herd continues its journey, but now our attention shifts away from migration and environment and towards something more subtle, more intimate, and just as essential to survival. The life of the herd itself. At first glance, the Saiga herd may appear simple, a group of animals moving together across open plains. But beneath this apparent simplicity lies a deeply structured social system shaped by necessity, instinct, and countless generations of adaptation to life in an exposed landscape. In the open steppe, isolation is dangerous. There are no forests to hide within, no dense terrain to break sightlines, no natural barriers to obscure approaching threats. Everything is visible, everything is exposed. In such an environment, life alone is fragile. But life together becomes something entirely different. The herd is not merely a collection of individuals. It is a coordinated presence, a living system that distributes awareness, reduces vulnerability, and increases the chances of survival for each member. This is not cooperation in a conscious or strategic sense. It is cooperation embedded in behavior, a form of social organization shaped by evolution rather than instruction. As the herd moves, individuals maintain a loose but consistent spacing between one another, close enough to remain connected, far enough to move freely. This spacing is not fixed. It adjusts continuously in response to terrain, wind, and perceived risk. When the landscape feels open and calm, the herd spreads slightly, allowing more room for feeding and movement. When conditions feel uncertain, the group contracts, drawing individuals closer together in a tighter formation. This flexibility is one of the key strengths of Saiga social structure. There is no single leader directing movement. Instead, decisions emerge collectively. Each individual responds to the movement of those nearby, and from these countless small adjustments, a unified direction naturally forms. It is a system of distributed awareness, a system where no single animal carries the full burden of vigilance. Instead, attention is shared across the group. While some individuals feed, others scan the horizon. While some rest briefly, others remain alert. This constant rotation ensures that awareness never fully disappears. Even in moments of calm, the herd remains attentive to its surroundings. The steppe demands this level of vigilance. Threats can appear from long distances. A slight movement on the horizon can signal danger long before it becomes visible in detail. Wind can carry scents across vast spaces, providing early warnings that the herd is trained to interpret instinctively. In this environment, survival is not about reaction alone. It is about anticipation. As we observe more closely, we begin to notice subtle differences in behavior within the herd. Some individuals appear more cautious, lifting their heads more frequently. Others spend longer periods feeding, showing slightly greater confidence in their immediate surroundings. Young Saigas stay closer to adults, mirroring movement patterns and learning through proximity rather than instruction. These variations create a dynamic social texture within the herd, not hierarchy, but diversity of roles and behaviors that contribute to overall stability. There is also a quiet form of communication present, though it does not rely on sound in any complex sense. Body orientation, movement direction, speed changes, all of these signals are interpreted continuously by others in the group. When one individual begins to move with slightly increased urgency, nearby Saigas respond almost immediately, adjusting their own pace. This creates a cascading effect that can shift the entire herd's behavior within moments, not through command, but through alignment. The herd behaves like a fluid system, constantly adjusting to internal and external inputs. Yet despite this fluidity, there is remarkable cohesion. The group rarely fragments completely. Even when spreading out over wide areas, individuals maintain awareness of the larger formation. This balance between dispersion and unity is essential for survival on the steppe. Too much separation increases vulnerability. Too much concentration limits access to resources. The herd exists in a constant state of adjustment between these two needs. As evening light begins to deepen once more across the grasslands, the herd gradually slows its pace, not because of fatigue alone, but as part of its daily rhythm of movement and rest. Small clusters begin to form temporarily as individuals settle into feeding or brief pauses. Then, as conditions shift, these clusters dissolve and reform elsewhere. This continuous reorganization is natural to the Saiga's social structure. Nothing remains fixed for long. Even social bonds are expressed through proximity rather than permanence. Yet within this apparent fluidity, there is continuity. Individuals recognize familiar companions. Mothers remain close to their young. Groups that have moved together over time develop subtle patterns of synchronization. There is memory here, not in a narrative sense, but in behavioral familiarity. As the herd continues, the landscape around them remains open and vast. No edges define their movement. No boundaries constrain their direction. The sky above slowly transitions toward dusk, carrying the herd into another phase of the daily cycle. As light softens, vigilance subtly increases. The herd draws slightly closer together again. Movements become more coordinated. The sense of collective awareness intensifies. Night in the steppe brings different challenges than day. Visibility decreases. Sounds carry differently. The presence of distant predators becomes more uncertain, yet more psychologically significant. In response, the herd adapts, not through panic, but through quiet recalibration of social spacing and awareness. Even in rest, there is structure. Individuals may pause while standing, remaining partially alert. Others lie down briefly, conserving energy while still maintaining proximity to the group. There is no complete disengagement. The herd never fully dissolves into vulnerability. As we remain with them through this transition, it becomes increasingly clear that the Saiga herd is not simply a survival mechanism. It is a social organism in its own right, a distributed system of awareness, movement, and response that functions only through the presence of many individuals acting in subtle coordination. No single Saiga could survive the steppe alone for long, but together they form a structure capable of enduring its challenges across seasons and years. As night begins to approach again, the herd's silhouette becomes more unified against the fading horizon. Their movement slows but does not stop. Their awareness deepens but does not tense. They continue forward, not as separate beings, but as a shared presence moving through the vastness of the Eurasian steppe. And in this quiet collective motion, we find one of the most profound truths of their existence. Survival here is not individual achievement. It is shared continuity. A living rhythm carried forward by many bodies, moving together beneath the same endless sky. In the next chapter, we will follow the Saiga through the changing seasons, where this delicate balance between herd, land, and survival is tested by the shifting rhythms of climate itself. Chapter 9. The Changing Seasons. The steppe never remains the same for long. Even when it appears unchanged beneath a vast and still sky, subtle transformations are always underway. The wind carries different temperatures. The light shifts its angle. The grasses respond in quiet, invisible ways to time passing through them. For the Saiga antelope, these changes are not background details. They are the structure of life itself. Everything the herd does is shaped by the rhythm of seasons, not as a calendar, but as lived experience, as physical reality that determines where they move, how they feed, when they rest, and how they survive. Spring arrives first as a soft suggestion across the land. Snow begins to retreat from the plains, not all at once, but in gradual patches where earth slowly reclaims warmth. The air becomes lighter, moisture returns to the soil, and almost imperceptibly, life begins to rise again from what seemed dormant. For the Saiga herd, this is a time of expansion. Movement becomes more active. Energy is directed toward regions where fresh vegetation begins to appear. Young grasses emerge quickly, taking advantage of the brief window of favorable conditions. The herd follows this emergence with quiet precision, moving through areas where nourishment is most abundant. There is a sense of renewal in this season. Not celebration in a human sense, but continuity of survival after hardship. Winter has passed, and with it, the most demanding period of scarcity. As spring deepens, the steppe becomes more visually alive. Greens spread across the land in soft waves. Wildflowers appear in scattered patterns, adding brief colors to an otherwise vast and uniform landscape. The saiga moves through this environment with steady calm. Feeding becomes more frequent. Rest periods become more relaxed. The tension that defines winter survival begins to ease, yet awareness never fully disappears. Even in abundance, the herd remains attentive, because change here is never permanent. Summer follows spring with a gradual intensification of light and heat. The sun rises higher in the sky and remains longer above the horizon. The grasslands begin to dry in certain regions. Water sources become more distant. The herd responds by adjusting its range, seeking areas where moisture remains in the soil or where vegetation retains its nutritional value longer. Heat across the steppe can be intense, but it is not uniform. Some areas remain relatively cool due to wind exposure or geographic variation. Others become dry and challenging, requiring the herd to avoid prolonged presence. During this time, the saiga's adaptations become especially important. Its nasal structure helps regulate air intake in warm, dusty conditions. Its body efficiency allows long-distance travel without excessive energy loss. Its herd coordination ensures that movement remains balanced and distributed. Summer is not a season of crisis, it is a season of management. Autumn arrives quietly, often without a clear beginning. The light changes first, becoming softer, lower, and more angled across the landscape. The grasses begin to lose some of their vibrancy. Seeds scatter across the ground, preparing for future cycles of growth. For the saiga, autumn is a season of transition. Movement increases again, but in a different way than spring. Now the herd begins to prepare for the approaching cold. Feeding becomes more selective as vegetation quality declines. Energy is directed toward maintaining strength for the coming winter. There is a sense of quiet preparation in the herd's behavior, not anticipation in a conscious sense, but biological readiness shaped by generations of seasonal repetition. Winter arrives not as a single moment, but as a gradual dominance of cold over the land. Temperatures drop steadily, wind becomes sharper, snow spreads across the steppe, transforming its appearance completely. The familiar greens of grass disappear beneath a white and muted surface. Visibility changes, sound changes, movement changes. For many species, winter is the most challenging season. For the saiga, it is a test of endurance. Food becomes more difficult to access. The herd must travel further and work harder to find exposed vegetation beneath snow cover. Energy conservation becomes critical. Movements become more deliberate and efficient. Group cohesion becomes even more important as protection against harsh environmental exposure. And yet, even in this difficult season, life continues. The herd persists. Step by step, day by day, across frozen landscapes shaped by wind and silence. Winter is not absence of life, it is a different form of life, one that demands patience, resilience, and careful balance between effort and survival. As we observe the full cycle of seasons, it becomes clear that the saiga does not simply endure environmental change. It is synchronized with it. Its entire existence is built around responsiveness to seasonal rhythm. There is no separation between animal and environment here, only participation in a continuous cycle that repeats with variation but without interruption. Spring restores, summer challenges, autumn prepares, winter tests. And through all of this, the herd continues, moving, adapting, maintaining continuity across landscapes that never remain still for long. As this chapter comes to a close, the saiga herd moves onward beneath shifting skies, carrying with it the accumulated experience of countless seasonal cycles, each one shaping its behavior slightly, each one reinforcing the quiet intelligence of survival across the vast Eurasian steppe. In the next chapter, we will follow the herd through the birth of new life, where survival is renewed again through the arrival of calves and the delicate beginning of another generation. Chapter 10. The calving season. The steppe is quiet in a different way now. Not the silence of winter's harsh stillness, nor the gentle calm of distant migration, but a quieter, more delicate stillness that seems to hold its breath in anticipation of something new. The Saiga antelope herd moves more slowly through the landscape, as if the entire rhythm of life has softened in response to an unseen shift. This is the calving season, a time when the continuity of life reveals itself not through movement across vast distances, but through the quiet arrival of new beginnings. Across the open plains, hidden in subtle depressions of land and sheltered areas shaped by wind and grass, female saigas prepare for birth. There is no constructed nest, no enclosure, no protection built by hands, only the natural geometry of the steppe itself, offering small variations in terrain that provide minimal shelter within an otherwise exposed world. It may seem fragile at first glance, but this system has persisted for thousands of years, because in this environment, survival is not defined by absolute safety. It is defined by timing and adaptation. The females gather loosely in groups, maintaining enough distance to avoid drawing unnecessary attention, yet remaining close enough to sense one another's presence. This balance is essential. Too isolated, and vulnerability increases. Too concentrated, and the risk of attracting predators becomes greater. The steppe demands precision even in its most intimate moments of life. As days pass, the herd becomes more still than usual. Movement continues, but with greater caution. Each step is measured, each pause extended. The landscape itself feels different during this time. The wind still moves across the grasses, but it seems softer, less intrusive, as if even nature recognizes the importance of what is unfolding. Then, gradually, the first calves begin to arrive. They enter the world quietly, not with noise or spectacle, but with a gentle transition from hidden existence into open air and light. Within moments of birth, the newborn saiga is already part of a much larger rhythm. It does not remain still for long. Its first movements are uncertain, fragile, yet guided by instinct that requires no instruction. Within a short time it stands, and soon after, it begins to follow its mother. This immediate adaptation is essential. The steppe does not offer prolonged protection. Remaining still for too long increases risk. Movement, even in its earliest form, becomes a necessity. The mothers remain close to their calves, their presence forming a quiet shield within the openness of the landscape. There is no aggression in their protection, no dramatic defense, only proximity, only awareness, only the subtle positioning of bodies that ensures young calves remain within a protective field of attention. As more calves are born, the herd slowly transforms, not in structure, but in energy. There is a sense of renewal that spreads through the group even though the external environment remains unchanged. The grasses continue to sway, the wind continues to move, the sky continues its slow passage from horizon to horizon. Yet, within the herd, something new has begun. The presence of new life alters behavior in subtle ways. Movement becomes more deliberate, rest becomes more frequent. The pace of migration adjusts to accommodate the needs of the youngest members. Calves stay close to their mothers, often moving in small, coordinated steps that mirror adult motion but with less certainty. They learn not through instruction but through imitation. Every movement is observed, every pause is absorbed. Every direction taken by the herd becomes a lesson in survival. The steppe, in turn, responds quietly to this new generation. Grasses bend gently beneath smaller steps. Winds carry softer disturbances. Even predators, though always present in the background of this ecosystem, adjust their behavior in response to the increased awareness and density of the herd. Calving season is not only a biological event, it is an ecological moment of recalibration. Balance is temporarily reshaped, attention is heightened, life becomes more concentrated in its most vulnerable form. As days progress, calves grow stronger with surprising speed, their movements become more coordinated. Their awareness of surroundings sharpens. The bond between mother and calf remains central, guiding every interaction with the environment. But even within this bond, independence slowly begins to emerge. Small moments of separation appear. A few steps taken alone, a brief pause away from direct contact, then a return. Each cycle building confidence, each repetition strengthening instinct. The herd continues to move across the steppe during this period, but migration becomes more measured. Distances are adjusted, pace is moderated. The needs of the youngest members subtly influence the direction of the entire group. This is one of the quiet strengths of Saiga social life. Flexibility within structure, adaptation without disruption. As the sun moves across the sky, casting shifting patterns of light over the grasslands, the presence of calves becomes more visible within the herd. They are small points of movement among larger bodies, constantly adjusting, learning, and responding. Yet despite their vulnerability, there is no sense of chaos. The herd remains cohesive, stable, continuously aware. Even rest periods are shared in close proximity, ensuring that calves remain protected without isolation. At night, the landscape changes again. Temperatures drop slightly. The wind feels more distant, more layered. The herd gathers more tightly than during daytime movement, forming a loose protective arrangement around the youngest members. There is no sleep in the absolute sense for the herd as a whole, only alternating states of rest and awareness distributed across individuals. This ensures continuity of protection even in the quietest hours. As we observe this cycle, it becomes clear that birth on the steppe is not an interruption of life. It is part of its continuous flow. There is no separation between vulnerability and survival. They exist together within the same rhythm. Each calf represents both fragility and future strength. Each birth reinforces the persistence of a species that has endured countless environmental shifts across time. As the days of calving season continue, the herd slowly begins to reintegrate its broader migratory rhythm. Movement increases slightly, spacing expands again. The youngest members now move more confidently within the group, no longer confined strictly to immediate maternal proximity. The steppe stretches endlessly ahead once more, and the herd resumes its gentle progression across it. But now, it carries something additional, not weight, but continuation, a renewed expression of life moving forward through time. And as this chapter comes to a close, the Saiga herd continues its journey beneath the open sky, now accompanied by the quiet presence of a new generation, learning, step by step, how to exist within the vast and ancient rhythm of the Eurasian steppe. In the next chapter, we will explore the predators of this world and how their presence shapes the behavior, awareness, and survival strategies of the Saiga herd in the open plains. Chapter 11. Predators of the Steppe. The steppe is never truly empty. Even in its quietest moments, when the wind moves gently through endless grass and the horizon seems untouched by life, there are always hidden presences shaping the rhythm of survival. For the Saiga antelope herd, awareness is not limited to land and weather. It extends into the unseen presence of predators that share the same vast environment. These predators are not constant figures on the horizon. They appear unpredictably, they move silently, they exist in the margins of perception, where distance and terrain make them difficult to fully observe. Yet their influence is always present, not through direct confrontation, but through the shaping of behavior, movement, and attention. Among the most significant predators of the steppe are wolves, not as isolated individuals, but as coordinated packs capable of traveling long distances across open terrain. Their presence introduces a different rhythm into the ecosystem, a rhythm defined by pursuit, observation, and timing. The Saiga does not often see wolves directly. Instead, it senses their possibility. A shift in herd behavior can occur without visual confirmation. A subtle tightening of formation, a change in direction, an increase in vigilance. These responses are shaped by generations of inherited awareness. In the open steppe, survival depends on responding not only to what is visible, but to what might be present. Wolves rely on endurance and coordination. They use the vast openness of the landscape not as a disadvantage, but as an advantage. Distance becomes a field of strategy. Movement becomes a form of communication within the pack. The relationship between predator and prey here is not static. It is dynamic, continuous, shaped by conditions that shift with weather, terrain, and time of day. For the Saiga, awareness of predators is distributed across the herd. There is no single individual responsible for detection. Instead, vigilance is shared. Each animal contributes a fraction of attention to the wider environment. Together, these fragments form a collective awareness that extends beyond any single point of observation. When one saiga reacts to a distant disturbance, others respond almost immediately. The herd adjusts as a whole, even if only a few individuals have directly perceived the change. This distributed sensitivity is one of the key survival mechanisms of life on the steppe. It reduces reaction time, it increases resilience, it ensures that no single point of failure determines the fate of the group. Beyond wolves, other predators also inhabit this world. Smaller carnivores move along the edges of the ecosystem, influencing behavior in more subtle ways. Raptors circle above, their movement slow and patient, scanning the grasslands for vulnerability. Even their presence, distant and silent, contributes to the atmosphere of constant awareness within the herd. The steppe does not allow complacency, but neither does it allow constant fear. Instead, it cultivates a state of balanced alertness, a readiness that exists alongside calm. As we observe the saiga herd moving across the landscape, we notice how this balance is maintained even during feeding or rest. Heads lift periodically, eyes scan the horizon, ears rotate subtly in response to faint sounds carried by wind. Then, just as quickly, attention returns to feeding or movement. This cycle repeats continuously, not as anxiety, but as adaptation. The presence of predators shapes not only behavior, but also spatial organization within the herd. Individuals position themselves in ways that maximize collective visibility. Edges of the herd are more alert. Central areas provide relative safety for calves and resting individuals. This structure is fluid, constantly adjusting as the herd moves across changing terrain. In open environments, there is no fixed safe zone. Safety is created through awareness and distribution. The steppe itself amplifies this dynamic. Its openness means that detection can occur from great distances, but it also means that escape requires speed, coordination, and early awareness. There is no cover to hide behind, no dense terrain to break pursuit. Everything depends on timing. A slight delay in reaction can determine the outcome of an encounter. This reality has shaped the saiga's entire evolutionary path. Speed is essential, but so is endurance, so is group cohesion, so is the ability to change direction quickly as a unified system. When a potential threat is detected, the herd does not scatter randomly. Instead, movement becomes coordinated in a fluid wave. Direction shifts occur almost simultaneously across individuals. This minimizes confusion and maximizes collective speed. The herd becomes a single moving entity, capable of rapid repositioning across the landscape. Yet most of the time, no such event occurs. Predators are present, but not always active. Much of life on the steppe is defined by anticipation rather than action. Long periods of calm interrupted occasionally by moments of heightened alertness. This rhythm shapes the emotional landscape of the herd in ways that are subtle but continuous. Calves learn this rhythm from the beginning. They observe the responses of adults. They experience moments of increased alertness and understand instinctively that certain signals require attention. Over time, this learning becomes embodied, not taught, but absorbed through experience. As evening approaches, the herd begins to tighten slightly in formation, not dramatically, but enough to reflect the changing conditions of visibility and risk perception. The lowering light reduces the range of sight across the plains. Shadows lengthen, details become less distinct. In response, proximity within the herd increases. This adjustment is not conscious. It is an inherited response to environmental change. The steppe itself influences behavior in this way. Light and darkness shape social structure as much as predator presence does. As night begins to settle, the herd becomes more unified in appearance. Movement slows, awareness increases, rest becomes lighter, distributed in alternating patterns across individuals. Even in sleep-like states, there is no complete loss of awareness. The herd remains partially connected to its surroundings at all times. Predators, though still present in the broader ecosystem, become less visible during these hours. Yet their influence does not disappear. It remains embedded in behavior, in spacing, in vigilance, in the quiet coordination of bodies resting and moving together beneath the dark sky. The steppe at night feels different. Sound travels farther. Silence feels deeper. The absence of visual clarity increases reliance on other senses: smell, sound. Subtle vibrations in the ground all contribute to the herd's awareness of its environment. As we remain with the saiga through this nocturnal landscape, it becomes clear that predators are not simply external threats. They are part of the ecological structure that shapes life itself. Their presence influences movement even when absent. Their potential shapes behavior even when unseen. And in this way, they are woven into the same fabric of existence as the herd they pursue. As the night continues, the saiga herd moves slowly onward across the steppe, maintaining its balance between calm and alertness, between rest and readiness, continuing its ancient rhythm beneath a sky that watches without interference. In the next chapter, we will explore the human connection to the steppe and the saiga, and how centuries of shared landscape have shaped both survival and perception across time. Chapter 12: The Human Connection. The steppe carries memory in a way that is not immediately visible. It is not stored in monuments or written records etched into stone. Instead, it exists in patterns of movement, in the quiet paths carved across grasslands, and in the long coexistence between species that have shared this vast landscape for thousands of years. Among these species, one presence has gradually become part of the saiga's world: humans. Not as a single force, but as shifting cultures, moving societies, and changing relationships with the land. For much of its history, the Saiga antelope has lived alongside nomadic peoples who also followed the rhythms of the steppe. These human groups did not remain fixed in one place. They moved with the seasons, with water sources, and with grazing conditions for their own animals. In many ways, their lives reflected the same fundamental principle as the saiga itself: movement as survival. The steppe is not a landscape that easily supports permanent settlement in all regions. Its openness, while offering vast resources, also demands adaptability. For nomadic cultures, this meant developing ways of living that aligned with environmental change rather than resisting it. Herding animals across long distances, following seasonal patterns, understanding wind, weather, and terrain with deep familiarity. In this shared environment, humans and saigas occasionally crossed paths, not always in conflict, not always in harmony, but in coexistence shaped by mutual awareness of presence. To the saiga, humans were simply another distant form of movement on the horizon. Sometimes stationary, sometimes mobile, sometimes accompanied by other animals, always part of the larger ecological picture of the steppe. For humans, the saiga was both a resource and a symbol of the wild, open land they inhabited. Its migrations were observed, followed, and sometimes depended upon. Its presence indicated the health of the grasslands. Its absence suggested change in ecological conditions. Over centuries, this relationship evolved. In some periods, the balance between human activity and wildlife remained relatively stable. Nomadic lifestyles allowed for movement that did not fully disrupt the natural cycles of the steppe. In other periods, changes in population, technology, and land use began to alter this balance. The introduction of new forms of settlement and agriculture gradually transformed parts of the steppe. Fences appeared where once there had been uninterrupted movement. Routes that were once open became divided. The scale of movement that defined both saigas and nomadic humans began to face new limitations. Yet even as landscapes changed, the fundamental connection between humans and the saiga did not disappear. It simply shifted. In some regions, the saiga became more distant from human activity. In others, it continued to share overlapping space, adapting once again to altered conditions. There is a quiet complexity in this relationship. It is not defined by a single narrative. It contains both coexistence and pressure, both observation and impact, both continuity and disruption. The Saiga does not interpret these changes in abstract terms. It responds to them directly through behavior. Changes in land use affect migration routes. Alterations in vegetation influence feeding patterns. Human presence, when frequent or intense, can shift herd movement into different regions entirely. And yet, despite these changes, the Saiga continues to persist. Its resilience is not based on resistance alone, but on flexibility, the ability to adjust to shifting conditions while maintaining core survival patterns. As we observe the herd moving across the steppe, it is possible to imagine how generations of Saigas have navigated landscapes gradually shaped by human presence. Some routes remain ancient, passed down through instinct and repetition. Others are modified in response to new environmental realities. The result is a dynamic system of movement that reflects both natural cycles and historical change. Humans, too, have observed this animal for centuries. In stories, in practical knowledge, and in lived experience, the Saiga has appeared as part of the steppe's identity. Its migrations were once predictable events that marked seasonal transitions. Its herds could be followed across great distances, forming part of the ecological understanding of the land. In more recent times, scientific observation has added another layer to this relationship. Researchers study migration patterns, population dynamics, and behavioral adaptations, not as distant observers, but as participants in a shared effort to understand and preserve a species deeply connected to the steppe ecosystem. Conservation efforts have become part of this modern chapter of human-Saiga interaction, protecting migration corridors, monitoring population changes, working to ensure that the balance between land use and wildlife survival can be maintained. These efforts reflect an awareness that the fate of the Saiga is closely tied to the state of the steppe itself. As we continue to follow the herd, the landscape begins to feel more layered in meaning. It is not only a natural environment, it is also a historical space, a place where human movement and animal migration have intersected across centuries, where paths have overlapped, diverged, and occasionally reconnected. The Saiga moves through this landscape without awareness of history in the human sense, but its behavior carries the imprint of that shared past. As evening approaches again across the steppe, the herd continues its steady progression. In the distance, faint signs of human presence may occasionally appear, structures far away, distant movement along the horizon, but these remain peripheral to the herd's immediate experience. What matters most is the continuity of grass, wind, and space, and the ability to move through it safely. The steppe remains larger than any single presence within it, whether animal or human. It contains all within its vast openness, and within that openness, life continues to adapt, adjust, and persist. As this chapter comes to a close, the Saiga herd moves onward beneath the same expansive sky that has witnessed both natural cycles and human history unfolding side by side. In the next chapter, we will explore the ancient trade routes and empires that once crossed this same land, revealing how the steppe has long been a bridge between worlds, shaping movement far beyond the life of any single species. Chapter 13: Ancient Roads Across the Steppe. The Eurasian steppe is not only a landscape of grass and wind. It is also a corridor of movement that has shaped human history for thousands of years. Long before modern borders, railways, or maps divided the world into fixed regions, this vast open land served as a bridge between distant civilizations. Across its endless plains, goods, ideas, cultures, and entire societies moved slowly but continuously, following routes that were not marked by stone or sign, but by memory, necessity, and geography itself. These were the ancient roads of the steppe, and they existed long before they were ever written down. For the Saiga antelope, these routes are not historical concepts. They are simply part of the environment, lines of movement that sometimes overlap with its own migrations, sometimes diverge, and sometimes disappear entirely beneath shifting sands and grasslands. But for humans, these paths once formed the backbone of intercontinental connection. Caravans moved across the steppe carrying silk, spices, metals, and ideas. Merchants traveled in groups for safety, relying on knowledge passed down through generations to navigate the vast distances. These journeys were slow, demanding, and shaped entirely by the rhythms of nature. Water sources determined rest points, seasonal weather dictated timing, grasslands guided direction. In many ways, human movement across the steppe mirrored the migration of animals like the saiga. Both depended on openness. Both relied on adaptation. Both required deep understanding of a landscape that offered no fixed certainty. Among the most famous of these historical networks was the Silk Road, a vast system of interconnected routes linking East Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. But the Silk Road was not a single road. It was a living web of paths, constantly shifting in response to political change, environmental conditions, and economic need. Cities rose and fell along its corridors. Trading posts emerged in fertile regions. Entire cultures developed around the flow of movement across the steppe. Yet beneath this human history, the natural world continued its own cycles uninterrupted. The saiga moved across these same regions, following seasonal patterns that often intersected with human activity, but were not defined by it. In some areas, human settlements created points of attraction where water or grazing resources were more available. In others, increased activity pushed wildlife further into open, less disturbed regions. The relationship was never static. It shifted continuously across time. As empires expanded across the steppe, they brought new forms of organization to the land. Roads became more structured. Trade became more regulated. Military movement increased in certain regions, adding new layers of activity to the open plains. Yet even in these periods of greater human presence, the fundamental nature of the steppe remained unchanged. It was still open, still vast, still governed by climate, season, and ecological rhythm. The saiga, moving through this environment, continued to adapt as it always had. Its migration routes sometimes overlapped with human trade paths, especially in regions where grasslands and water sources aligned. But there was rarely direct interaction in a sustained sense. Instead, there was coexistence shaped by parallel movement. Humans following economic and cultural needs, saigas following ecological necessity, both traversing the same land in different ways. Over centuries, these ancient roads became less defined by caravans and more by historical memory. Empires shifted, trade networks transformed, new transportation technologies eventually replaced many of the old routes. Yet the imprint of those pathways remains embedded in the geography of the steppe. Subtle traces in terrain, old river crossings, natural corridors shaped by repeated use. Even today, modern roads and infrastructure often follow similar lines, echoing the logic of ancient movement across open land. For the saiga, however, time is not divided into historical periods. The steppe is always present, always continuous, and its migration patterns, though influenced by changing conditions, remain rooted in ecological cycles that predate human history. As we follow the herd through this landscape, it becomes possible to see how deeply intertwined movement is with the identity of the steppe itself. Nothing here exists in isolation. Everything is connected through flow. Wind moves across continents. Animals migrate across seasons. Humans once traveled across empires, all within the same vast open system. Even silence here is not empty. It is filled with the memory of passage. The herd continues forward, crossing ground that has been shaped by countless generations of movement. Grass bends under their weight and then slowly recovers. The wind carries traces of distant regions. The horizon remains endlessly open, suggesting not limitation but continuity. In the fading light of day, the steppe feels less like a place and more like a process, a long unfolding of time expressed through space. The saiga moves within this process without interruption, not as a traveler through history, but as a living component of an environment that contains history within its surface. Ancient roads may have carried merchants and empires, but they also existed within a larger system of life that never stopped evolving. And the saiga, quietly moving across these same expanses, represents one of the most enduring expressions of that continuity. As this chapter closes, the herd continues into the widening dusk, passing through landscapes shaped by both nature and centuries of human passage, beneath a sky that has witnessed all movement without distinction between one form of journey and another. In the next chapter, we will return fully to the present moment on the steppe, focusing on survival in real time, where every step, every breath, and every change in wind can influence the immediate future of the herd. Chapter 14. Survival in the present moment. The steppe does not remember the future. It does not plan ahead. It does not hold intentions in the way living beings with complex cognition might imagine time. Instead, it exists entirely in unfolding presence. And for the Saiga antelope herd, survival is always anchored in this immediate reality, not yesterday, not tomorrow, but the shifting conditions of right now. As the herd continues its movement across the open plains, every element of the environment becomes relevant: the direction of the wind, the texture of the grass beneath their hooves, the distance between individuals, the position of the sun in the sky. Even the faintest change in air pressure can influence behavior, guiding subtle adjustments in movement and awareness. There is no separation between perception and action here. They occur almost simultaneously. A shift in wind direction is not analyzed, it is felt and responded to. A distant sound is not interpreted in layers of meaning. It is registered immediately as something requiring attention or not. This immediacy is one of the defining characteristics of life on the steppe. There is no time for abstraction when survival depends on responsiveness. As we observe the herd more closely, we begin to notice how finely tuned their behavior is to the present moment. A slight pause in movement can ripple across the group within seconds. One individual lifting its head changes the posture of those nearby. A shift in direction by a small cluster of saigas gradually alters the trajectory of the entire herd. These adjustments are not coordinated through visible leadership. They emerge naturally through continuous interaction. Each animal responds to its immediate surroundings and to the behavior of others within its field of perception. The result is a system that remains fluid, adaptable, and constantly self-correcting. The steppe itself reinforces this necessity for immediacy. Weather conditions can change without warning. A calm sky can shift into strong wind within moments. Rain can arrive suddenly across distant regions and alter the texture of the land far ahead. Visibility can expand or collapse depending on dust, light, and atmospheric conditions. In such an environment, long-term certainty is not available. Only present awareness matters. As the herd moves forward, feeding continues intermittently, but even feeding is shaped by constant attention to surroundings. Heads lower to the grass but never remain down for too long. The cycle of feeding and scanning is continuous, a rhythm of nourishment and vigilance woven together into a single pattern of behavior. Young saigas, still learning the structure of this world, mirror the adults closely. They follow movement. They pause when others pause. They adjust their position based on the shifting shape of the herd. Through repetition, they begin to internalize the logic of survival in an open environment. There is no formal teaching, only exposure, only imitation, only experience repeated across moments. As daylight continues its slow progression, the landscape reveals subtle changes in tone and texture. Areas of grass that appeared uniform from a distance now show variation in density and color. Slight depressions in the ground collect moisture differently. Wind-exposed ridges dry more quickly. These details form a constantly updating map that the herd reads without conscious deliberation. The present moment is not static, it is layered, a combination of immediate sensation and accumulated familiarity. Even memory plays a role here, though not as narrative reflection. It exists as pattern recognition embedded in behavior. The herd remembers through movement, through repeated response to similar conditions encountered across generations. As the sun shifts position in the sky, shadows begin to lengthen once again. This change in light subtly alters perception across the herd. Distances appear different. Edges of movement become more pronounced. The sense of exposure increases slightly as visibility transitions toward evening conditions. In response, the herd gradually adjusts its spacing. Individuals move closer together, not abruptly, but through continuous small corrections in position. This is survival expressed as geometry. A shifting configuration of bodies responding to environmental change. There is no command initiating this adjustment, only shared sensitivity to the same conditions. As we continue to observe, it becomes clear that the Saiga does not distinguish between environment and threat in the abstract sense. Everything is potential information. Everything is relevant until proven otherwise. A rustle in the grass, a shadow moving at distance, a change in wind carrying unfamiliar scent. Each of these elements enters awareness instantly and is evaluated through instinctive response, not thought, but embodied reaction shaped by countless cycles of survival. As evening deepens further, the pace of movement begins to slow slightly, not due to fatigue alone, but as part of the daily rhythm of the steppe. Energy conservation becomes more important as temperature drops. The herd settles into a more compact formation. Rest periods increase in frequency but remain distributed across individuals so that awareness is never fully absent. Some saigas remain standing while others lower themselves briefly to the ground. There is no uniform state of rest, only alternating phases of partial relaxation and continued vigilance. The steppe does not allow complete disengagement. Even in stillness, life remains exposed to change. Wind continues to move across the grasslands. Distant sounds carry across open space. The possibility of movement at the edge of perception never fully disappears. As night approaches, the herd becomes even more unified in presence. The boundary between individuals feels less distinct. Not physically, but behaviorally. Movement becomes more synchronized. Awareness becomes more shared. The herd, in this moment, feels like a single organism responding to a vast environment. And yet each individual remains fully capable of independent action if needed. This duality is essential. Unity without loss of individuality, independence without isolation. As darkness begins to settle across the steppe, the herd continues its quiet progression. Not hurried, not paused, but flowing steadily through the present moment, where survival is not a concept to be understood, but a condition to be lived continuously. In the next chapter, we will follow the Saiga into the deeper night, where senses beyond sight become essential, and the world is shaped by sound, wind, and the hidden movements of life across the darkened plains. Chapter 15, The Language of Night. When daylight finally fades from the steppe, it does not disappear all at once. It dissolves gradually, as if the world is lowering its voice rather than ending a conversation. The horizon, once sharp and open, becomes softer. Shapes lose their edges. Distances begin to feel less certain, and the vast Eurasian plain, so defined by visibility during the day, transforms into a landscape shaped by suggestion rather than detail. For the Saiga antelope herd, this is not a moment of retreat. It is a transition into another mode of existence. Night on the steppe is not absence. It is a different kind of presence, one that must be understood through senses other than sight. As darkness settles fully, the herd does not stop moving. It adjusts. Movement becomes quieter, more deliberate, more compact. Steps are placed with greater care, not because the land has changed, but because perception has changed. What was once visible is now inferred. What was once immediate is now interpreted through indirect signals. Wind becomes more important than light. Sound becomes more informative than shape. Even the ground beneath their hooves becomes a source of guidance, offering subtle feedback about terrain that can no longer be fully seen. The Saiga does not panic in this transformation. It has experienced it countless times. Night is not unfamiliar. It is part of the rhythm of survival. As the herd continues forward, the spacing between individuals tightens slightly, not into a rigid formation, but into a softer cohesion. A shared awareness expressed through proximity. Each animal remains attuned to the movement of those nearby, forming a network of continuous feedback that allows the group to stay together. even when visibility is limited. There is no need for vocal communication. The steppe does not reward noise at night. Instead, communication is silent. A shift in direction, a change in pace, a brief pause in movement. These are enough to inform the herd of collective adjustment. In the darkness, sound becomes more meaningful. The rustle of grass under hooves, the distant movement of wind across open plains, the faint calls of nocturnal life far beyond the herd's immediate path. Each sound is received not as narrative, but as data, something present, something to be acknowledged, something to be integrated into continuous awareness. Above, the sky reveals itself differently at night. Without the dominance of sunlight, stars appear in vast numbers, scattered across the darkness like an extension of the steppe itself. There is no artificial separation between sky and land, only two dimensions of the same immense space. The herd moves beneath this expanse, unaffected by its beauty, yet fully embedded within its scale. As we follow them further into night, another layer of perception begins to emerge. Smell becomes more pronounced. The saiga's sensitive nasal structure plays a crucial role here, filtering and interpreting air that carries information from distant parts of the landscape. Changes in humidity, shifts in temperature, the faint trace of other animals moving far away. Even the presence of moisture in the soil can influence direction over time. Night amplifies these signals. With reduced visual input, other senses take precedence. The herd becomes a system of continuous sensing, responding to an environment that is no longer defined by what can be seen, but by what can be detected indirectly. There is a quiet intensity to this state, not tension, but attentiveness, a kind of expanded awareness that fills the absence of light without creating anxiety. Calves stay closer to adults during these hours. Their movements are smaller, more cautious. They learn quickly that night requires different behavior than day, not through instruction, but through observation and repetition. The herd continues to function as a unified system even in darkness. Perhaps even more so, because when sight is limited, cohesion becomes essential. As time passes slowly through the night, the steppe reveals another of its characteristics. Stillness is never absolute. Even in apparent silence, life continues in subtle layers. Insects move through grass. Small mammals navigate hidden pathways beneath the surface. Distant predators may be active or resting, their presence unknown but always possible. This uncertainty is not resolved. It is integrated. The saiga does not seek complete clarity. It survives through partial knowledge combined with rapid responsiveness. The herd pauses occasionally, not fully stopping but reducing movement to near stillness. These moments are not rest in the human sense, they are recalibrations. Brief returns to full environmental awareness before movement resumes. Then, as if following an invisible rhythm, the herd continues onward again. Slowly, steadily, without disruption. The ground beneath them remains open and unbroken. There are no barriers in the traditional sense. Only variations in texture and elevation that must be interpreted continuously through contact. The steppe at night is not a separate world. It is the same world experienced through different limitations. As we remain with the herd, it becomes increasingly clear that survival here depends not on dominance over the environment, but on participation within it. The saiga does not control its surroundings. It listens to them, responds to them, moves with them. Even rest is shaped by this relationship. Individuals pause in positions that allow quick re-engagement with movement if needed. There is no full surrender to vulnerability, only managed intervals of reduced activity. The herd remains distributed across a wide area, yet never disconnected. Awareness flows continuously between members, maintaining cohesion through invisible threads of behavior and proximity. As the night deepens further, a subtle shift occurs. The wind begins to change direction, not dramatically, but enough to alter the way scent and sound travel across the plains. The herd responds almost immediately, a slight tightening of formation. A minor adjustment in direction. These changes are not dramatic events. They are micro-responses embedded within continuous perception. Nothing is announced, everything is felt and responded to. The step in this way is always communicating, not through language, but through conditions, through pressure, through movement, through absence and presence intertwined. Eventually, the herd slows again, not because the night is ending, but because the rhythm of movement requires balance. Even migration must contain moments of reduced pace. The saiga does not rush through darkness. It passes through it with the same steady continuity that defines its existence across all conditions. As the final part of the night settles over the steppe, the herd remains in motion, unified not by structure, but by shared adaptation to an environment that is always changing, yet always the same in its demands. And within that balance, life continues quietly, step by step, breath by breath, beneath a sky that never stops watching, but never intervenes. In the next chapter, we will follow the return of dawn, where the first light reveals not only the landscape again, but the continuity of survival carried through the night into a new cycle of day on the endless Eurasian steppe. Chapter 16, The Return of Dawn. Night on the steppe does not end suddenly. It loosens its grip slowly, as if the darkness itself is reluctant to release the land. For a long time there is no clear boundary between night and morning, only subtle shifts in tone, a faint softening of the sky, a gradual thinning of darkness rather than its disappearance. The Saiga antelope herd continues moving through this transition without hesitation. There is no moment where they pause to acknowledge the return of light. Instead, they simply adapt, as they always do, to what the environment becomes. Dawn on the Eurasian steppe is not dramatic. It is quiet, almost imperceptible at first. The first change is not visual, but atmospheric. The air becomes slightly cooler in some areas and warmer in others, depending on how the wind flows across the open plains. Then, slowly, the horizon begins to separate itself from the darkness, not sharply, but like a memory becoming clearer. As the light returns, shapes begin to emerge once again. Grasslands that were previously invisible now reappear in soft gradients of color. Rolling terrain becomes visible in layers of distance, and the endless openness of the steppe, which during the night was perceived through sound and scent, now returns to the realm of sight. The herd does not change direction because of dawn, but dawn changes how the herd is seen. What was once a moving shadow becomes a living formation again, spread across the land in gentle coordination. Individuals that were previously indistinguishable now appear as distinct bodies moving in shared rhythm. Calves remain close to adults, their smaller forms becoming more visible in the growing light. There is a sense of continuity here that is important to understand. Dawn is not a beginning for the saiga, it is a continuation. A transition between two modes of perception rather than two separate states of existence. As visibility improves, the herd gradually relaxes its nighttime tightness in formation. Spacing becomes slightly wider, movement becomes more fluid. The need for compressed cohesion decreases as visual awareness returns, but vigilance does not disappear, it simply shifts form. Now, instead of relying primarily on sound and scent, the herd can once again integrate sight into its awareness of the environment. Distant shapes on the horizon can be identified earlier. Changes in terrain are easier to interpret. Potential movement far away becomes visible rather than inferred. Yet even in this renewed clarity, the saiga does not fully abandon caution. The steppe is never predictable for long. As the herd continues forward, feeding begins to resume more actively. Grass, now clearly visible, becomes part of the renewed rhythm of the day. Heads lower, then rise again, then lower once more. This cycle, repeated across individuals, forms the foundation of daytime survival. Feeding is not separate from movement, it is embedded within it. The herd advances slowly while grazing, maintaining continuous interaction with the land beneath them. The steppe, in early morning light, reveals its vast subtlety. Different shades of green and gold spread across the plains. Small variations in moisture create darker patches of vegetation. Areas exposed to wind appear slightly drier and more textured. These differences guide movement as much as they support feeding. The saiga does not simply consume the landscape, it reads it, interprets it, responds to it. As the sun continues to rise higher, temperature begins to shift again. Warmth spreads across the grasslands in gradual waves. The herd adjusts its movement accordingly, seeking balance between feeding efficiency and thermal comfort. There is no urgency, only adjustment, only continuous calibration to changing conditions. Calves, now more active after the night, begin to explore slightly wider distances from their mothers, but they do not drift far. The invisible structure of the herd still holds them in place through subtle behavioral cues, a glance, a shift in position, a change in pace. All of these signal alignment and safety. The steppe allows independence only within awareness. As we follow the herd further into the morning, it becomes clear that dawn is also a moment of reorganization. The memory of night fades, not in experience but in influence. The herd re-expands into the openness of daylight spacing. Individuals distribute themselves more widely across the grasslands again, taking advantage of visibility to cover more ground while feeding, yet they remain connected through constant perception of one another. This balance between dispersion and unity is one of the most important aspects of saiga survival. Too much separation reduces collective protection. Too much compression limits access to resources. The herd exists in a dynamic equilibrium between these two states. As morning advances, distant movement occasionally appears on the horizon, not necessarily threats, not necessarily relevant, but always noted. The herd does not react immediately to every distant shape. Instead, it filters information continuously, distinguishing between normal environmental variation and meaningful change. This ability is not conscious analysis. It is refined instinct shaped by countless generations of exposure to the steppe. The wind strengthens slightly as the day progresses. Grass bends in waves across the landscape, and the herd continues its steady forward movement, now fully within the light of a new day. There is something deeply continuous about this cycle. Night into dawn, dawn into morning, morning into afternoon. Each transition flows into the next without interruption, and the saiga moves through all of them with the same underlying rhythm. Step by step, breath by breath, moment by moment, as if time itself is not a series of events, but a single continuous motion expressed through the landscape. As this chapter comes to a close, the herd continues across the open steppe beneath a rising sun, carrying forward the experience of the night into the clarity of day, where survival resumes its quiet and endless rhythm. In the next chapter, we will explore the hidden micro-world of the steppe, where insects, plants, and unseen ecological processes shape the foundation of everything the saiga depends upon, often without being noticed at all. Chapter 17. The Hidden Micro-World of the Steppe. At first glance, the steppe appears simple, an endless sea of grass stretching toward a distant horizon shaped by wind and time, open and uniform in a way that feels almost empty. But this simplicity is an illusion. Beneath and within this vast openness exists a dense and intricate micro-world that supports every visible form of life, including the Saiga antelope herd that continues its quiet movement across the plains. To understand the saiga fully, one must also understand what is almost never seen. The foundation of life here is not only the large movements of herds and predators, but the small, continuous processes happening at ground level and below. Insects move through the soil in constant cycles of transformation, breaking down organic matter and returning nutrients to the earth. Plants grow, die, and regenerate in rhythms that are influenced by rainfall, temperature, grazing pressure, and the composition of the soil itself. Even the soil is not inert. It is a living system of minerals, microorganisms, moisture, and organic traces that determine what can grow and where. The saiga moves across this system without fully perceiving its complexity, yet it depends on it completely. Every step it takes is part of a larger ecological exchange that begins far below its hooves. The grasses that dominate the steppe are not uniform entities. They are specialized survivors adapted to extreme fluctuations in temperature, moisture, and grazing intensity. Some species grow quickly after rainfall, completing their life cycle in short bursts of abundance. Others grow slowly, conserving energy over longer periods. Some are more resistant to drought. Others are more nutritious during specific stages of growth. The saiga does not need to understand these distinctions in abstract terms. It responds to them through experience, selecting feeding areas based on subtle differences in texture, taste, and availability. As the herd continues its slow movement across the landscape, grazing becomes an ongoing interaction with this invisible botanical complexity. Each bite taken by a saiga influences the structure of plant communities. Areas that are grazed frequently respond by regrowing differently than untouched regions. Some plants become more dominant, others recede. This creates a constantly shifting mosaic of vegetation patterns across the steppe. Insects are equally important in this hidden world. They pollinate plants, break down organic material, and serve as food sources for birds and small mammals. Their activity is influenced by temperature, humidity, and vegetation density. At times, their presence becomes more visible in the air and on the ground. At other times, they remain almost completely hidden within the soil and grass. Yet their impact is continuous. The saiga does not interact with insects directly in a significant way, but it exists within the ecological framework they help sustain. Even the wind plays a role in this microworld. It carries seeds across vast distances, distributing plant life across regions that may otherwise remain isolated. It dries or moistens the surface of the soil, influencing germination and growth. It reshapes the distribution of temperature across the ground, creating microclimates within small areas of the steppe. What appears as a single uniform landscape is, in reality, a constantly shifting patchwork of conditions at different scales. As we follow the herd more closely, it becomes clear that the saiga is not separate from this micro-world. It is embedded within it. Its movement shapes it, and it is shaped by it in return. The pressure of hooves on soil affects seed dispersion. Grazing patterns influence plant regeneration. Movement across terrain compacts or loosens soil structure over time. These interactions are subtle, but they accumulate across generations, gradually shaping the ecological identity of the steppe. There is also a hidden layer of seasonal transformation occurring beneath the visible surface. In spring, microbial activity in the soil increases rapidly as temperatures rise and moisture returns. This accelerates plant growth and creates the conditions for abundance. In summer, the system adjusts to heat and dryness, slowing certain processes while maintaining resilience through deep-rooted survival strategies. In autumn, decomposition becomes more prominent as plants die back and organic matter returns to the soil. In winter, activity slows significantly, but does not stop entirely. Life continues beneath snow and frozen ground in reduced but persistent form. The saiga herd moves through all of these cycles without directly perceiving most of them. Yet its survival depends on their continuity. Without healthy soil systems, grasses would not grow. Without grasses, there would be no feeding grounds. Without feeding grounds, migration would lose its structure. Everything is connected in layers that extend far beyond what is immediately visible. As afternoon light spreads across the steppe, the herd continues its steady progression. The grasses sway gently in response to wind patterns that also influence insect movement and soil moisture evaporation. Small birds occasionally move through the grasslands, feeding on insects or seeds, adding another layer of interaction within the ecosystem. Even distant predators are indirectly influenced by these micro-world dynamics, as prey availability and movement patterns are shaped by the same underlying systems. The steppe is not a collection of separate components. It is a continuous process of interaction across scales. From microscopic organisms in the soil to large migratory herds moving across continents, every level is connected. As we observe the saiga within this context, its movement takes on a deeper meaning. It is not only migration across space, it is participation in a living system that operates simultaneously at multiple scales of time and complexity. Each step forward is also a step through layers of ecological relationships that extend beneath and beyond immediate perception. Even rest periods are part of this system. When the herd pauses, pressure on vegetation temporarily decreases, soil organisms continue their activity undisturbed, plants begin subtle recovery processes. The landscape responds continuously, even in moments of stillness. As evening approaches once again, shadows stretch across the grasslands, and the herd gradually adjusts its spacing, not because of visible change alone, but because of the subtle environmental cues that signal transition. Temperature shifts, light softens, wind patterns evolve. The saiga responds to all of these inputs simultaneously, maintaining its position within the broader ecological rhythm of the steppe. As this chapter comes to a close, we are reminded that what appears large and simple is always supported by what is small and complex. The saiga does not exist above this system, it exists within it. And through its continuous movement, it becomes part of the hidden architecture that sustains life across the endless Eurasian steppe. In the next chapter, we will explore the soundscape of the steppe, where wind, movement, and silence combine to form an auditory environment that shapes perception, awareness, and survival for every living being within it. Chapter 18. The Soundscape of Silence. The steppe is often described as quiet, but this quiet is not emptiness. It is a soundscape so subtle that it requires attention to perceive. For the Saiga antelope herd, sound is not background decoration. It is a primary layer of information woven into every moment of movement across the open plains. Even when nothing obvious is heard, the environment is never truly silent. Wind moves continuously through the grasslands, creating a low, shifting texture of sound that changes with speed, direction, and terrain. Sometimes it is a gentle rustle, barely distinguishable from stillness. Other times it becomes a steady flow, like an invisible river passing through the land. This constant presence forms the base layer of the steppe's auditory world. Over it, countless smaller sounds emerge and disappear. The soft impact of hooves on soil, the bending of grass under movement, the subtle exhalation of breath in cool air. Each of these sounds is small on its own, but together they create a continuous acoustic field that surrounds the herd at all times. The saiga does not process these sounds individually in the way a human might analyze a complex environment. Instead, it interprets them as patterns, changes in rhythm, shifts in intensity, interruptions in continuity. These variations carry meaning. A sudden increase in rustling behind the herd may indicate movement of another animal. A change in wind direction can alter how sounds travel, making distant activity appear closer or farther than it is. Even silence itself becomes meaningful when it contrasts with surrounding sound patterns. The herd moves through this auditory environment with constant sensitivity. Heads lift not only in response to visual cues, but also to changes in sound. Ears rotate subtly, adjusting to capture different directions of input. This continuous listening is not conscious effort. It is embedded in the structure of survival. On the steppe, sound travels differently than in enclosed environments. There are no walls to reflect it, no dense forests to scatter it. Instead, sound moves across open space, shaped only by wind, terrain, and distance. This allows certain sounds to carry far beyond their point of origin. A distant movement can become perceptible long before it becomes visible. For the saiga, this creates an expanded field of awareness that extends beyond sight. In this environment, silence is never absolute. Even during moments of apparent stillness, the steppe continues to produce subtle auditory information. Insects move through grass at ground level. Small animals shift beneath the surface. Air currents interact with vegetation in continuous motion. The herd exists within this layered soundscape without attempting to isolate individual elements. Instead, it listens to the whole. a composite perception formed from countless small signals. As the herd moves, its own sounds become part of the environment. The collective movement of many bodies across grasslands creates a soft, continuous presence that blends into the broader acoustic field. There is no sharp distinction between sound produced and sound received. Both exist within the same system of awareness. This integration is essential for survival, because in an open landscape, sound can reveal both opportunity and danger. The steppe also changes its soundscape with time of day. During daylight hours, wind dominates much of the auditory experience, carrying with it the texture of movement across vast distances. In early morning, the soundscape feels more delicate, with softer tones and clearer separation between individual elements. At midday, heat can slightly alter how sound travels, creating subtle distortions in distance perception. As evening approaches, the character of sound shifts again, becoming deeper and more diffuse. At night, the soundscape transforms entirely. Without visual dominance, sound becomes the primary mode of environmental perception. This is when the Saiga relies most heavily on auditory information. Even small disturbances become significant. A single change in rhythm can influence the behavior of the entire herd. There is no need for complexity in communication. The environment itself provides sufficient information for coordination. As we follow the herd through this acoustic landscape, it becomes clear that sound is not separate from movement. It is produced by movement, and it guides movement in return. Every step the Saiga takes contributes to the soundscape it depends on for awareness. This feedback loop between action and perception is continuous. As wind strengthens or weakens, the quality of sound changes. As vegetation density varies, acoustic clarity shifts. As terrain rises or falls, sound is amplified or softened. The herd adapts constantly to these variations without conscious deliberation. In this way, the steppe functions as an integrated sensory system. Sound, movement, wind, and space are all interconnected. There is no single dominant channel of perception. Only overlapping layers of information that together form awareness. Even predators contribute to this soundscape. Their presence is often first detected through subtle disturbances in the acoustic environment rather than direct sight. A slight interruption in the rhythm of grass movement, an irregular pattern in distant sound flow. These signals are not always precise, but they are enough to trigger attention. The Saiga responds not to certainty, but to possibility. As evening deepens again, the herd continues its steady movement across the plains. The wind shifts direction slightly, altering the way sound travels across the landscape. Distant tones become more pronounced in some directions and more muted in others. The herd adjusts accordingly, maintaining cohesion through continuous interpretation of these changes. There is a quiet intelligence in this process, not analytical, but responsive, not fragmented, but unified. The soundscape of the steppe is not something the Saiga observes from a distance. It is something it lives within, a continuous field of information that surrounds, informs, and shapes every aspect of its existence. As we close this chapter, the herd moves forward beneath an open sky, guided not only by sight and smell, but by an ever-present acoustic environment that connects all movement across the endless Eurasian steppe. In the next chapter, we will explore the final convergence of all these elements: land, sound, movement, and time, where the Saiga's existence becomes a complete expression of life within a vast and interconnected system. Chapter 19. The convergence of all things. The steppe no longer feels like separate elements unfolding in parallel. At this stage of the journey, everything begins to merge. Land, wind, sound, movement, light, and time all begin to behave less like independent forces and more like expressions of a single continuous system. For the Saiga antelope herd, this convergence is not something observed from a distance. It is something lived directly, moment by moment, without separation between experience and response. The herd continues its movement across the Eurasian steppe, but now every action feels connected to every other layer of existence around it. A shift in wind is also a shift in sound. A change in light is also a change in awareness. A variation in grass density is also a change in movement pattern. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything influences everything else. This is not a philosophical idea for the Saiga. It is the physical reality of survival. As the herd advances, its movement becomes increasingly fluid, not faster, not slower, but more integrated. Each individual seems less like a separate unit and more like a part of a distributed pattern of motion. When one Saiga adjusts direction, others follow almost immediately, not through imitation alone, but through shared perception of the same environmental signals. The step itself guides this coordination. Wind flows across the land, carrying scent and sound simultaneously. Grass bends in patterns that reveal changes in terrain. Light shifts across uneven ground, revealing subtle contours that influence direction. Even temperature gradients across the landscape contribute to decision-making at the level of instinct. The Saiga does not analyze these factors individually. It receives them as a combined field of information, a continuous input that shapes movement without interruption. In this convergence, time also loses its sharp boundaries. Past experience exists not as memory in narrative form, but as embodied pattern. Future survival is not imagined, but anticipated through sensitivity to present conditions. Everything collapses into now, a now that is not static, but constantly unfolding. As the herd moves forward, feeding continues intermittently. But even feeding is no longer a separate activity. It is integrated into movement, a fluid rhythm where grazing, walking, scanning, and adjusting all occur within the same continuous cycle. There are no clear divisions between actions, only transitions. The landscape itself reinforces this sense of convergence. The horizon remains open and unbroken. There are no fixed landmarks dominating perception, only gradual changes in texture and tone across vast distances. This lack of interruption in the visual field creates a perception of continuity that matches the internal rhythm of the herd. Even silence, sound, and wind begin to feel like variations of the same underlying presence. Wind is not separate from sound. It is the medium through which sound travels, and sound is not separate from movement. It is the echo of movement across space. And space itself is not empty. It is filled with subtle variations in pressure, temperature, and density that influence perception at every level. The Saiga exists within this unified field without needing to distinguish its components. Survival here does not depend on analysis. It depends on integration. As evening begins to approach once again, the herd does not experience a sharp transition. Instead, light gradually softens across the grasslands. Shadows lengthen slowly, merging with the contours of the land. Visibility decreases in a continuous gradient rather than an abrupt shift. The herd responds in the same way. Spacing tightens slightly. Awareness increases subtly. Movement becomes more cohesive, not because night demands it suddenly, but because the environment changes gradually and continuously. There is no point at which adjustment begins. It is always already happening. As we observe this state of convergence more closely, it becomes clear that the Saiga's existence is not composed of separate survival strategies layered on top of each other. It is a single adaptive system expressed through multiple channels. Movement is perception. Perception is movement. Environment is response. Response is environment. Everything reflects everything else. In this way, the step ceases to be a background. It becomes an active participant in life. A dynamic system that shapes and is shaped by the herd continuously. Even the boundaries between individual animals begin to feel less rigid at this stage of understanding. Each Saiga is still separate, physically distinct, but behaviorally, they function as part of a larger coordinated field. Decisions emerge from collective interaction with the environment rather than isolated choice. As night begins to settle again on the horizon, the herd maintains its forward progression. The sky above shifts into deeper tones. The wind carries cooler air across the plains. Sounds become more diffuse and less directional. Yet nothing in the herd breaks coherence. If anything, coherence becomes stronger under these conditions. Because in reduced clarity, reliance on integrated perception increases. The convergence of all sensory and environmental inputs becomes even more essential. As this chapter reaches its conclusion, the Saiga herd continues moving through a landscape that is no longer experienced as separate elements, but as a single flowing reality, where every component of existence is connected in continuous interaction. In the final chapter, we will follow this journey to its thematic conclusion, where the meaning of the Saiga's life on the steppe is revealed not as an ending, but as an ongoing cycle without true beginning or final destination. Chapter 20. The Endless Cycle. There is no final point on the steppe. No true beginning, no absolute ending, only continuation, unfolding endlessly across space and time in patterns that repeat, without ever being exactly the same. The Saiga antelope herd moves through this reality not as a story moving toward conclusion, but as a living expression of repetition and change woven together. By the time we reach this final chapter, the idea of final itself begins to dissolve. What remains is movement and awareness, and the quiet persistence of life across an immense and open world. The steppe stretches in every direction without boundary. Even when the herd turns, it is still within the same vast continuity. Even when seasons change, they do not replace one another. They flow into each other. Spring becomes summer without interruption. Summer fades into autumn through gradual transformation. Autumn deepens into winter in slow accumulation, and winter eventually loosens into spring again. This cycle is not observed by the Saiga as a concept. It is lived completely, without separation between experience and environment. The herd continues its migration, but migration itself is not a journey with a destination. It is a response to shifting conditions that never settle permanently. Grass grows in one region and fades in another. Water appears in distant places and recedes from familiar ones. Wind patterns reshape the feel of the land continuously. The Saiga follows these changes not by planning but by sensitivity, by being present within them. As we observe the herd now, there is a sense that everything we have seen before still exists here. Predators remain part of the invisible structure of awareness. The soundscape continues beneath the wind. The micro-world of soil and insects still supports every step. Human traces remain embedded in distant layers of geography and memory. Ancient roads still exist as faint echoes in the shape of the land. Night still follows day, and dawn still returns without announcement. Nothing has disappeared. Everything continues. The herd itself, now moving across the steppe, carries within it every chapter of its existence. The memory of night movement remains in its responsiveness. The experience of predators remains in its vigilance. The cycles of birth remain in its structure. The hidden ecological systems remain in every bite of grass it takes. Even human presence, though distant, remains part of the broader environment it navigates. Nothing is ever fully separate. As the herd advances, there is a quiet stability in its motion, not because the world is stable, but because adaptation is constant. Each moment requires adjustment. Each adjustment becomes the basis for the next. There is no final equilibrium, only continuous recalibration. The Saiga does not seek balance as a fixed state. It exists within imbalance that is always being corrected. This is what allows life to persist here, not control, but responsiveness, not certainty, but sensitivity. As the light shifts across the steppe once again, the herd continues its steady progression. The sky changes color in slow gradients. The wind carries subtle variations in temperature and scent. Grass bends and rises under passing movement. And all of this is absorbed into the herd without separation between observation and action. In this final perspective, it becomes clear that the Saiga is not merely an animal moving across a landscape. It is part of the landscape's own expression of life. A moving point within a larger system that includes soil, sky, wind, time, and countless other forms of existence. The boundary between organism and environment is not fixed, it is fluid, continuously negotiated through interaction. And so the story does not conclude, because nothing on the steppe concludes in an absolute sense. Even death becomes part of continuation, returning nutrients to soil, supporting future growth, shaping conditions for the next cycle of life. Even disappearance is transformation. As the herd moves onward, it carries this truth without needing to understand it intellectually. It is embedded in behavior, in rhythm, in instinct refined across generations. The steppe remains open, always. And within that openness, the saiga continues, step by step, season by season, generation by generation. Across time that does not end, and space that does not close, there is no destination waiting at the edge of the horizon, only more horizon, only more movement, only more becoming. As this final chapter settles into silence, the herd is still in motion beneath the vast sky, and the story continues, not because it is unfinished, but because it was never meant to end.